Prologue. 10 days before the siege. Sol IOB-007 lay beneath them like a jewel scratched into stone. From orbit, the world looked calm, rocky ridges glinting beneath a pale sun, rivers of mineral-rich dust curling through jagged valleys, the occasional glint of metal where human hands had already claimed the surface. A year ago, the squad had landed here, 20 soldiers and a team of engineers, tasked with securing a foothold for what the company called Project Prosperity. In reality, it was about resources, rare ores, strategic metals, fuel for a growing human presence in the outer rim. The outpost had been built from scratch, building by building, wall by wall. Corridors snaked through the rock, walls reinforced with composite steel, bunkers dug into the ridges. A small network of sensors and communications relays kept the squad connected to orbital command. The miners had yet to arrive. Their crews and equipment would follow only once the outpost was deemed secure. Captain Reeve had walked every corridor in the early months, memorizing the layout like the lines on his palm. Mara had designed fallback points and redundancies for every conceivable breach. Lennox had found every corner where a bored soldier could hide, and occasionally, every corner where trouble could hide too. Together, they had made the base livable, survivable, and defensible. Now, 10 days before the official end of their tour, the routine had begun to feel like a trap. Replacements was due any moment, new personnel replacing them, fresh faces taking over the weary guard shifts. The miners would arrive shortly after that, their machinery tearing into the rock, extracting wealth from a planet that had lain dormant for centuries. But as Reeve walked the outer perimeter that evening, scanning the ridges through binoculars, he felt a chill that wasn't entirely from the thin air. The rock hummed faintly beneath his boots, a low vibration almost imperceptible. Mara had noticed it too in the sensor logs, subtle, fleeting spikes in thermal readings, inexplicable movement deep underground. Lennox had joked it was the planet shaking itself awake, and they had all laughed, dismissing it as nerves or fatigue. Still, the unease lingered. 10 days out from relief, and the outpost was theirs to guard. Every doorway, corridor, and approach was theirs to defend. And already, something beneath the surface seemed to be stirring. Reeve didn't know it yet, but this was the calm before the storm. Within hours of that unease, the ground would shake in earnest. The creatures that had slept for millennia, undisturbed deep beneath Sol OB-007, were waking. And the squad, exhausted from a year of vigilance, expecting only their tour to finish, would find themselves facing a siege unlike anything they had prepared for. 10 days. 10 days to survive. 10 days to hold the line before anyone else could arrive. The first tremors ran through the ridges like a heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, hungry, Reeve gripped his rifle tighter, staring out across the rocky expanse. Somewhere beneath the surface, something had woken, and it was coming. Chapter 1. Day 1. The sky over Sol IOB-007 was the color of old iron. A hard, cold light bled through the clouds, flattening everything beneath it. The rocks, the dust, the jagged ridges that stretched for miles in every direction. Nothing moved except the wind. It dragged thin curtains of grit across the plain, whispering against the metal walls of Outpost Epsilon. 20 soldiers, 1 base, and 10 days of holding ground until the mining crews arrived. That was the job. Simple on paper. Captain Reeve stood on the perimeter wall, scanning the horizon through his visor. The world looked endless. No trees, no water, just cracked basalt and sharp shadows. His HUD readouts flickered. Atmospheric pressure dropping, slight temperature decline, storm activity building to the east. Routine. Predictable. The kind of data that made Command think everything was under control. It wasn't the readings that bothered him. It was the silence. Inside the walls, the squad was unpacking crates and swearing at machinery. The smell of burned wiring and disinfectant mixed with the dust. From one corner came the rhythmic clank of Lennox trying to kick life into a stubborn generator. "Bloody things possessed," the corporal muttered, boot connecting with metal. "You'd think if they can fly halfway across a galaxy, they'd learn how to make a plug that fits." Reeve dropped from the wall and crossed the yard, boots crunching grit. "Try not to break the only power source we've got before lunch, Corporal." Lennox straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, smirk half hidden under a streak of dust. "Wouldn't dream of it, sir. Just establishing dominance. Machines respect that sort of thing." Reeve gave him a look, the faintest flicker of amusement, then checked the readout on the generator himself. A few taps, and the hum evened out. "Dominance established," he said dryly. Lennox smiled. "Show off." They both turned as Lieutenant Mara approached, tablet in hand, her armor scuffed from work rather than combat. Calm, deliberate, eyes like polished steel. "Perimeter sensors are online," she said. "Drone patrols set to a 20-minute loop. Power grid stable for the moment." "For the moment?" Reeve asked. "There's seismic chatter about 4 clicks east. Could just be ground settling, but the readings don't look natural. Sharp spikes, irregular patterns." Reeve frowned. "Tremors?" "Small ones. Nothing to panic about. Yet." Lennox leaned in. "So the planet's burping. Brilliant. Bet that's in the brochure somewhere. All-inclusive stay, occasional tectonic indigestion." Mara ignored him, scrolling through the feed. "Command didn't mention this region being geologically active. Command rarely mentions the things that might make us say no," Reeve said. "Keep monitoring it. If it worsens, I want to know before the ground decides to open under us." She nodded. "Yes, Captain." By midday, the outpost had settled into rhythm. The squad rotated through drills, checked fortifications, tested turret calibrations. The hum of machinery replaced the wind for a while. Inside the mess tent, the air was thick with the smell of protein packs and recycled coffee. Reeve sat opposite Lennox, helmet resting beside him, steam rising from his cup. The table was scratched metal, the kind that looked like it had survived 5 previous deployments. "So," Lennox said, 10 days left of holding a mining camp on a planet no one's heard of. You reckon anyone's going to remember us when it's over?" "Only if we screw it up," Reeve said. "Comforting." Mara entered, setting her datapad down beside them. "Drone 5 just went dark. Signal cut out mid-transmission." Reeve looked up sharply. "Where?" "Same direction as the tremors." She expanded the hollow map on the table, showing the outpost and the faint topography eastward. The drone marker blinked red, then vanished. No warning. Just gone. Lennox whistled under his breath. Maybe it hit a rock, or got tired of this lovely weather and buggered off home. Mara ignored him again. "We should send a recon team. Check for signal interference." Reeve hesitated, weighing it. Back end of their tour and their start losing eyes in the field. He didn't like coincidences. "Take 2 with you," he said finally. "Don't go far. If the ground starts to move, you pull back immediately." "Understood," Mara turned to go, but paused. If there's something alive out there. There isn't, Reeve said, more to steady the mood than because he believed it. This planet's been scanned top to bottom. It's empty. Right, Lennox muttered. Because scans never miss anything. The sun hung low by the time Mara's team reached the drone's last coordinates. The light had gone copper gray, casting the ridges in long, jagged shadows. Dust drifted across the surface like smoke. "Command, this is Recon Team Alpha," Mara said into comms. "We're at grid 407, visual on the wreck." Reeve's voice came through with static. "Copy that. What do you see?" Mara knelt beside the drone, or what was left of it. The frame was twisted, the outer plating torn open like tin. The sensors had been ripped clean off. Around it, the ground was scarred, not by weather or tools, but by something sharper. Parallel grooves, deep, precise. "Looks like it hit something solid," one of her soldiers said. "Or something hit it." Mara scanned the area. The grooves extended outward, disappearing into the rocks. Too even to be natural, too deliberate. She crouched lower, brushing dust from one of the marks. It wasn't just a groove. It was an impression. A claw. The comm crackled. "Mara?" Reeve's voice again. "Yeah," she said quietly. "We've got contact signs. Large, quadruped or more. No heat signature, but..." A vibration rippled through the ground, cutting her off. A low, rolling tremor that made the rocks shiver underfoot. "Seismic spike!" one of her soldiers shouted. "Back to the outpost!" Mara snapped. "Now!" They turned, sprinting toward the transport. Dust clouds rose behind them, and for a moment, she thought she heard something under the rumble. A clicking noise, faint but deliberate, like something waking up. The tremor faded as quickly as it began. The plane went still again. Reeve met them at the gate, watching as the rover came skidding through in a storm of dust. Mara climbed out, helmet under her arm, eyes hard. "You weren't imagining those readings," she said. Reeve took the data pad she handed him. The seismic waveforms spiked across the screen, sharp, rhythmic pulses that didn't match tectonic activity. It looked more like movement. "Multiple sources?" he asked. "Several. Deep." Lennox appeared beside them, rifle slung across his shoulder. "If this planet starts crawling, I'm putting in for a transfer." "Where to?" Mara said. "You hate space." "Yeah, but at least the void doesn't bite back." Reeve looked past them toward the horizon. The wind was rising again, howling across the plain. In the distance, lightning flashed behind the storm front, a faint, sulphurous glow. "Double the watch on all gates," he said. "We're not taking chances." That night, the storm came in heavy. Rain hammered against the outpost roof. Thin, acidic stuff that left streaks on the metal. The wind howled through the gaps in the plating, making the whole structure groan. Inside, the squad huddled in dim light. The hum of machinery, their only comfort. Reeve sat at the command table reading the seismic feed again. The pattern had stopped when the storm hit. Whatever was under them, if anything, had gone quiet. Mara stood nearby, arms crossed. Maybe it was just the planet settling. "Maybe," Reeve said, not convinced. "Or maybe it's waiting." Lennox's voice came from the doorway. "If it is, tell it to wait till morning. I'm trying to sleep." Reeve looked up, expression dry. Sleep while you can, Corporal. Always do, sir. Especially before the horror part starts. He left, boots echoing down the corridor. Reeve looked back at the monitor. The tremor readings pulsed faintly once more, a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat deep in the rock. He didn't say anything, didn't call it in, just watched it. Outside, the wind carried a low sound across the plain, a chorus of faint, overlapping clicks, almost hidden beneath the storm. The planet wasn't empty anymore. Chapter 2. Day 2. The storm had passed, but it hadn't gone quietly. A low mist clung to the ground, thick and pale, curling through the wreckage of the outpost's perimeter. Pools of rainwater shimmered on the metal plating, reflecting the dull gray of the morning sky. The world smelled of ozone and scorched dust, a chemical tang that lingered on the tongue. Captain Reeve walked the perimeter with slow, measured steps, boots splashing in shallow puddles. The air was cold enough to sting through his armor's seals. The wind had died, leaving only the hum of distant generator and the soft hiss of mist against metal. Outpost Epsilon had taken a beating. One of the east side turrets was bent halfway out of its mount. A supply drone lay on its side near the gate, legs twitching intermittently. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to show how fragile the place really was. He stopped beside the damaged turret. The frame was twisted, the plating torn inwards, like something had gripped it. Lennox's voice came from behind him. Storm did that? Reeve turned. Lennox stood there, coffee in one hand, rifle slung over his shoulder. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. Wind shear, maybe, Reeve said. Wind doesn't leave claw marks, Lennox replied, nodding to the metal. He wasn't wrong. Up close, the scoring was deep. 3 lines gouged clean through reinforced plating, each one almost the width of a man's finger. Reeve didn't answer. He just stared at them for a moment longer, then turned toward the horizon. The fog was thick enough to blur the ridgeline. Too quiet again. Let's get Mara, he said. I want her to see this. Inside the command module, the air was warmer but no less tense. The power grid flickered, the lights humming with each voltage shift. Mara stood over the holomap, scanning through seismic readouts. Morning, Lennox said as he entered. Or whatever passes for it here. She didn't look up. Tremors are still there. Fainter, but deeper. Brilliant, Lennox muttered. So whatever's under us is hitting the snooze button. Reeve came in behind him, rain still dripping from his armor. We've got new damage outside. East turret's been torn open. Mara frowned. Wind? Not unless it learned how to use claws. That made her pause. She grabbed her tablet and followed him out. The 3 of them stood by the turret as the mist began to thin. Mara crouched, running a gloved hand along the marks. The metal edges were curled inward, force from the outside. Could be flying debris, she offered. Storm pressure can do strange things. Lennox raised an eyebrow. Debris that came in triplets and had good aim? Mara sighed quietly. Fine. Not debris. Reeve said nothing. He was staring out toward the ridgeline again, eyes narrowing. Something about the way the fog hung there, too still, like it was listening. Double patrols, he said finally. 2 teams rotating every 3 hours. If anything moves out there, I want eyes on it. Yes, sir, Mara replied. Lennox gave a mock salute. Lovely. A scenic stroll through the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Reeve shot him a look. Take it seriously, Corporal. Always do, sir. Sarcasm's just how I process impending doom. By midday, the mist had burned off. The landscape looked worse under the light. Cracked black rock stretching to the horizon, steam rising from fissures in the ground. The air shimmered faintly with heat. Patrol 1 reported nothing unusual, just silence and dust. Patrol 2 never checked in. Mara was the first to notice. "We've lost comms with Bravo Team," she said, tapping her earpiece. "Last ping was near Sector Delta, 3 clicks northeast." Reeve didn't hesitate. "Get a rover ready." Lennox grimaced. "You're not thinking of going out there yourself, are you?" "I don't ask people to walk into something I won't," Reeve said, pulling his helmet on. "You're with me." "Of course I am," Lennox muttered. "Wouldn't want to miss the fun." Mara followed them to the rover, her expression tight. "Keep an open channel. I'll track your signal." "Copy that," Reeve said. The rover's engine rumbled to life, kicking up dust as it rolled out through the east gate and onto the open plain. The drive was short, but tense. The ground was uneven, pitted with cracks and sinkholes. The storm had carved strange channels through the rock, like veins running toward the horizon. "Still nothing on comms?" Lennox asked. "Nothing," Reeve said. "They were supposed to check in 20 minutes ago. Maybe their radio's fried. Maybe." The rover crested a ridge. What lay beyond froze them both for a moment. The patrol's vehicle was there, half buried in dust and rock. The windshield was shattered, the metal pitted and scored. The doors hung open. No movement, no bodies. Reeve killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. "Bravo team, this is Captain Reeve," he said into his comm. "Respond." Only static answered. They stepped out, rifles raised, boots crunching on grit. The wind had died again. The whole valley felt like it was holding its breath. Lennox moved to the rear of the rover, scanning the ground. "Tracks," he said quietly. "But not theirs." Reeve joined him. The prints were deep, 6 indentations per stride, evenly spaced, ending abruptly near the wreck. Something heavy had moved here. Something big. Reeve's gut tightened. Back in the rover. Now. They turned, just as a low vibration rolled through the ground. The surface trembled, fine dust leaping from the rocks. "Seismic spike," Lennox said. "Tell me that's the planet settling again." Before Reeve could answer, a sound broke the silence. A sharp, metallic click, 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 faint, then louder, moving beneath them. The ground heaved. Reeve shoved Lennox back toward the rover as the earth split open a few meters away, throwing rock and dust into the air. Something massive shifted beneath. A glimpse of movement, glistening and black, vanishing just as fast. The tremor faded. The ground closed like it had never moved. Both men stood frozen, breathing hard. "Still think it's debris?" Lennox said quietly. Reeve didn't reply. He climbed into the rover, slammed the throttle, and tore back toward the outpost, dust streaming behind them. By the time they reached the gates, the sun was already dipping behind the ridges. The air had turned copper again, and the long shadows stretched like claws across the valley floor. Mara was waiting. What happened? Reeve's face was grim behind the visor. Something's moving under the surface, big, fast. It took Bravo Team. Mara's jaw tightened. Took? There were no bodies. Lennox threw his rifle onto the table inside the command room. 1 minute the ground's solid, the next it's breathing. I'm not saying aliens, but Reeve cut him off. We don't speculate, we prepare. Seal all gates, lock down perimeter. No one outside after dark. Mara nodded, already keying in commands. If they're burrowers, we'll need seismic sensors around the perimeter. I can reroute the drone network. Do it, Reeve said. The rest of the squad gathered silently as the outpost shutters sealed with a heavy clang. The lights dimmed to red alert. The hum of the generators grew louder, a nervous heartbeat in the dark. Lennox glanced out through the viewport. The horizon was gone, swallowed by shadow. 10 days, he said under his breath. Then we can get of this rock. Reeve stood beside him, staring into the dark where the ground had moved. Then we'd better make sure nothing go wrong for the next 9. Outside, something shifted beneath the surface. A slow, deliberate scrape of claw against stone. The siege had begun. Chapter 3, Day 3. The morning after the storm broke pale and still. The sky was a washed-out silver, the kind that made distance vanish. The ground gleamed wet, every rock and panel of Outpost Epsilon coated in a thin skin of moisture. The smell was burnt dust and ozone, the leftovers of a long night. Inside the perimeter, the squad moved quietly, like people waking from a bad dream. Boots clinked on steel. Equipment hissed and whirred. No one raised their voice. Captain Reeve stood near the outer wall, helmet off, scanning the plains beyond the floodlights. The world looked clean again, calm, but he didn't buy it. You couldn't trust silence on a planet like this. Corporal Lennox approached with a ration bar and his usual smirk half in place. You'd think after a night like that, the planet might give us a lie-in. Reeve didn't turn. Planets don't care, Lennox. Yeah, well, they could at least pretend. He took a bite, chewed. So what's the plan, boss? Go poke the holes and see if something bites back? Reeve nodded. We checked the east perimeter. That's where the noise came from last night. Right, Lennox said. And here I was hoping you'd say breakfast. The mud outside clung to their boots, thick and dark. The landscape was a sprawl of jagged stone and fissures, with thin mist hanging low to the ground. Mara's voice came through on comms, crisp and measured. Seismic readings are quiet. Nothing major for the last 3 hours. Quiet's not comfort, Reeve said. They advanced in a staggered formation, rifles up, scanning every crevice. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, like iron dust. At the far edge of the east wall, the twisted remains of a turret still leaned awkwardly against the barricade. Its barrel was bent, the armor plating shredded from the inside out. Lennox crouched near a patch of disturbed soil. Sir, we've got a trail. Reeve joined him. The mud was pushed aside in wide grooves like something heavy had dragged itself through. It ran for about 20 meters, then stopped abruptly. Reeve's expression tightened. No boot prints? None. Whatever it was, it didn't walk. Reeve looked to 2 nearby soldiers. Follow it, slow and steady. The team moved out, the air thick with tension. The silence had that strange weight again, like the planet itself was holding its breath. Then came a sound, soft, irregular. A scrape. Lennox's head turned sharply. You hear that? Before anyone could answer, the ground ahead split open. The eruption was instant. Soil, stone, and mist exploding outward as a shape tore through the surface. 6 limbs, armor plates glinting in the light, jaws splitting wide as it came up. "Contact!" Reeve shouted. Gunfire snapped through the air. The creature moved like liquid metal, surging forward on 6 legs that clawed deep into the mud. Its armor shimmered like dark steel, each movement a heavy, resonant impact. Reeve fired center mass. The rounds sparked off the plates, some punching through at the joints. The thing's blood sprayed out in quick bursts of molten-looking fluid that hit the dirt with a hiss, cooling instantly into black, glassy shards. "Jesus Christ!" Lennox swore. "What is that thing?" "Kill it first!" Reeve barked. The creature reared, a guttural clicking roar shaking through the air. One soldier got too close. It swept him aside with a forelimb, throwing him 10 meters into a rock face. Reeve moved forward, precise and steady, firing controlled bursts into the softer plates under its head. Lennox circled wide, emptying a magazine into its flank. The creature staggered, convulsed, then collapsed in a shuddering heap, the mineral fluid still dripping and cooling to hard stone beneath it. The echo of battle faded, leaving only ragged breathing and the faint tick of hot metal. Lennox looked at the carcass, rifle still raised. "Tell me that's not a bloody insect." "Bigger problem if it is," Reeve said. They brought the body back on a carrier sled. Even dead, it felt wrong to be near. Heavy and alien, like the planet had grown it from the rock itself. Mara met them at the gate, eyes wide. "You actually brought it back?" Reeve said simply, "We need to know what we're fighting." The techs cut through the plates with industrial saws. Each layer was dense, laced with minerals. The interior flesh was fibrous, pulsing faintly even in death. When exposed, it bled that same molten-looking substance that cooled within seconds into a glossy shell. Mara studied it, voice low. "It's not acidic. It's geological, like the body's infused with ore. Maybe that's how it regulates heat underground." Lennox tilted his head. "So it's half rock, half nightmare." "Something like that," she said. "They've evolved around the planet's mineral cycle, feeding off what's beneath. They're not designed for the surface." Reeve frowned. "Until we woke them up." Silence lingered for a moment. Then Lennox muttered, "Next time, maybe we try mining on a nice quiet moon, yeah?" They burned the remains that afternoon, not out of fear of infection, just to stop the smell. The smoke rose black against the pale sky, carrying the scent of scorched stone and something faintly metallic. Reeve watched from the platform, expression unreadable. Mara joined him. "That thing was buried deep, Reeve. If there's one, there'll be more." He nodded slowly. "How many?" "I can't tell from scans yet, but the tunnels underneath us run for kilometers." "Population estimate?" She hesitated. "Unknown." Reeve looked out across the plain, the wind starting to pick up again. "Then we keep watch tonight. No gaps in the lights, no blind spots." Lennox, from behind them, called out, "And maybe a bigger fence while we're at it." "Get it built," Reeve said. By nightfall, the outpost looked like a fortress. Floodlights swept the terrain. Sentries manned every tower. The men tried to sound confident, but everyone knew what waited out there wasn't finished. Reeve walked the line, checking each post. The wind carried dust and the faint hum of machinery. Lennox leaned against a crate near the gate. "Bit quiet again, isn't it?" Don't say that, Reeve replied. I mean, it's too quiet. It's the kind of quiet that ends with screaming. Reeve finished for him. Mara's voice came through comms, sharp. Captain, you'd better come see this. He entered the command room. The seismic display on her monitor pulsed red. Not a single signal this time, but dozens, all around the perimeter. Lennox's voice dropped. Please tell me that's just a calibration error. Reeve stared at the screen. Stations, now. Get everyone ready. Outside, the floodlights trembled in their mounts. The ground began to move, not sharply, but rhythmically, like a slow, deliberate pulse beneath their boots. And in the mist beyond the walls, faint lights blinked open. Dozens of them. Eyes. Chapter 4. Day 3. Night. The floodlights stuttered once. Then the world came apart. A deep, rolling vibration hit the walls like a heartbeat made of stone. The ground rippled underfoot. Dust fell from ceiling panels, monitors flickered, and outside the gates, the mist turned to movement. Positions! Reeve's voice cut through the air. All stations! Fire discipline! Sectors locked! Alarms blared across Outpost Epsilon. Soldiers sprinted through the corridors, boots hammering metal, rifles clattering against armor. Searchlights swung wildly across the plain, slicing through the haze, and for the first time, they saw them. Shapes. Dozens. Six-legged silhouettes cresting the ridges, armor glinting wet and dark. Each one moved with a terrible purpose, fast but low, like hunting animals that had done this 1,000 times before. Lennox skidded to Reeve's side at the gate, breathing hard, helmet visor down. Well, that's a whole bloody family reunion. Save the jokes, Reeve snapped, slamming a fresh mag into his rifle. Mara, we've got visual, full breach risk, east, south, and front approach. Her voice came through the comm, tight but controlled. Copy, floodlights locked, turrets online. Try not to die. Appreciate the motivation. The first wave hit the outer wall like a train. Metal shrieked. The ground buckled. Searchlights caught flashes of dark chitin, claws scraping steel. Gunfire ripped the night apart. Controlled bursts at first, then desperate volleys as more targets appeared. Left flank, firing! Someone shouted. A creature vaulted the barricade, landing hard among the crates. Its mass hit the deck with a sound like breaking concrete. Lennox turned, firing at point-blank range. The rounds punched through its neck plates. Molten blood sprayed the wall, cooling in seconds into black, glassy streaks. Contact inside perimeter! Lennox barked. Reeve swung his rifle and joined in, cutting the creature down with short, brutal bursts. It collapsed, convulsing, limbs thrashing against the metal decking. Then another came. And another. Up in the command deck, Mara tracked motion feeds through shaking hands. The seismic grid was a sea of red. She opened the internal comms. All squads, maintain crossfire zones. Don't bunch up. They'll tunnel under if you give them a choke point. A blast rocked the wall. Dust filled the room. Mara flinched, but didn't step back. Come on, she muttered to the screens. Show me where you're going. A section of the west wall dropped off her sensor entirely. Reeve, she barked. They're tunneling under Section 4. Understood. Outside, Reeve grabbed 2 engineers. Get thermite down that line, now. They dropped canisters into the open cracks. Flame burst outward in roaring waves, the ground lighting up orange as the rock itself burned. For a moment, the tremors eased. Then a new one broke through the smoke behind them. The thing hit one of the engineers before he even screamed. A blur of claws and armor. Reeve fired instantly, emptying half a magazine into its thorax. The soldier fell, gone before he hit the deck. Lennox turned, face grim. "Bloody hell! They're learning the layout!" "Then we adapt faster," Reeve said. "No one breaks line. No one." The fight dragged on like a nightmare. Rounds screamed through the mist. The walls shuddered with every impact. Searchlights swung wildly, catching only pieces of movement. A leg, a jaw, a flash of bone under armor. Mara rerouted power to keep the south turrets alive. Sparks burst from the ceiling, the lights dimming. "We're losing circuits. If the main generator goes, we're blind." Reeve's voice was hard through the static. "Keep it alive. We'll hold the line." "Define hold," Lennox grunted, firing into another mass of movement. "Means we don't die here." "Oh, right. That all." He switched to grenades, tossed one through the mist, ducked. The explosion sent shards of molten glass raining down. Something shrieked from the darkness. Not pain, but coordination. They were signaling. Reeve's blood ran cold. They're not just attacking. They're talking to each other. The main gate buckled next. A long, low groan as the reinforced plates warped inward. The lights along the wall flickered. Half the outpost went dark. "South quadrant down," Mara called. Lennox swore under his breath. "I can't see a bloody thing." "Infrared only," Reeve ordered. "Switch visors." The world turned red and ghostly through the thermal optics. The creatures glowed faintly, cold at the edges, hot in the core. You could see them now, hundreds of faint silhouettes in the fog, circling, crawling, closing. "Jesus," Lennox whispered. "There's too many." "Then we make them earn it." They opened fire again, methodical and relentless. Every kill bought a few more seconds, but the numbers didn't stop. A comm burst cut through the chaos. "This is Alpha 2. We're being overrun at the North Storage Yard." Reeve spun. "Fall back to secondary. Hold what you can." "No time. They're..." The signal vanished in a burst of static. Mara slammed her fist on the console. "Reeve, I've lost 2 sections. We can't hold all quadrants." "Pull them in," he said. "Compact the perimeter. Anything outside's gone." "But the supply crates? Not worth lives. Do it." Lennox glanced at him. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure about surviving." They fell back through the compound, firing as they moved. The floodlights failed one by one until only the command deck still burned white through the dark. Reeve covered the retreat, his rifle barrel glowing red. One last creature lunged through the smoke. He caught it mid-air with a burst to the jaw, the round shattering the side of its head. It crashed down at his feet, twitching. The molten blood hissed where it touched his boot, cooling in jagged shards. Reeve stepped over it, eyes scanning the dark. Then, silence. The echoes faded. No more movement. Just smoke, debris, and the faint crackle of fires. Lennox stood beside him, chest heaving. "That it?" Reeve didn't answer. He raised his rifle slowly, scanning the mist. "For now." Mara came down from the deck, face drawn. "Casualties, 8 confirmed," maybe more. North wall's breached but holding. We've got damage across 3 sectors. Reeve nodded once. Start patching. Rotations every 2 hours. Lennox leaned on his rifle, half smiling despite the exhaustion. Well, that was fun. Get used to it, Reeve said quietly. That was just the first night. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and minerals. Somewhere in the distance, deep beneath the surface, came a faint, rhythmic tremor, like something vast moving far below. Mara looked out into the blackness. They're regrouping. Reeve didn't look away. So will we. Chapter 5, Day 4, morning after the attack. Dawn came slow over Outpost Epsilon, pale and bruised, the kind of light that made wreckage look older than it was. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burnt metal. The floodlights were still on, buzzing faintly against the fog, throwing long, tired shadows across the mud. The compound looked like a battlefield from a different war, walls dented, plating torn open, crates shattered and scattered. Pools of cooling black glass, the creature's blood, were hardened in the dirt, cracked like obsidian. No one spoke for a long time. The survivors moved quietly, collecting what they could. Bodies were lined beside the inner wall, covered in tarps cut from old thermal sheets. Reeve stood over the list, thumb pressed to the tablet screen, reading each one. His face didn't move, but his jaw worked slightly, muscle flickering under the stubble. Lennox approached, helmet off, eyes red from smoke and lack of sleep. We lost Chambers, Ray, and the twins from Alpha 2. Jesus, those lads didn't even get to finish their first deployment. Reeve didn't answer immediately. He just handed Lennox the tablet. 13 left. Make sure everyone eats something. Then rest rotations. 2 hours max. Lennox looked down the list, lips tightening. 13. Out of 20. Still enough to hold, Reeve said. Yeah, if the planet takes the day off. Reeve's look shut that down. Lennox sighed and walked off toward the armory. The morning was quiet except for the sound of repairs. Welding torches hissed. Power tools screamed against steel, and boots splashed through the mud. The men worked in silence, faces blank, moving with that mechanical steadiness that came after fear. Lieutenant Mara stood at the damaged east wall, datapad in hand. She looked different in daylight, more drawn, dark hair slicked to her neck with sweat and grime. Lennox joined her, wiping grease from his hands. Any good news, Lieutenant? She glanced at him. Define good. Something that doesn't end with us buried under 6-legged bastards. Mara tilted the pad to show him. Reinforcements for the wall. We'll layer the plates, link the generators. If we can create overlapping energy fields, we might slow them down before they breach next time. Lennox frowned. Might? It's better odds than standing out there with rifles and optimism. He smirked faintly. You know, that optimism bit's usually my department. She looked up, the faintest edge of tired amusement in her eyes. Then keep it going, Corporal. Someone has to. By midday, the smoke had thinned. The sun was a weak disk behind the clouds, giving everything a washed-out gray tone. The outpost's radio mast leaned slightly, bent but still transmitting. Inside the command room, Reeve, Mara, and Lennox gathered around the map table. The holographic display flickered, showing seismic readings like veins of red light under the surface. They're everywhere, Mara said. We picked up movement through 6 tunnel systems. They're deep now, probably recovering. Regrouping, Reeve said quietly. Lennox rubbed at his eyes. And we're sure they'll come again? Animals that size don't just stop, Mara said. They hunt, they eat, they protect territory. Reeve leaned forward, eyes scanning the readings. Then we turn the territory against them. Block the tunnels, collapse the weak points. If they want a siege, we'll give them one. Lennox gave a short laugh, half admiration, half disbelief. That's the spirit. We'll outdig the diggers. Mara glanced at him. You volunteering to take the first spade? Not a chance. Even Reeve's mouth twitched slightly. For a moment, just a moment, the air lightened. By afternoon, they buried the dead. No ceremony, no speeches, just a row of shallow graves dug into the slope behind the wall. The ground was rocky, and the shovels rang with every strike. Reeve stood at the edge of the line, helmet under his arm. The wind whipped over the ridge, carrying dust and the low hum of the generator. Lennox looked down at the row of mounds. You ever get used to this, sir? Reeve's eyes didn't leave the graves. No. Didn't think so. They stood there in silence for a while. The sky was colorless, the kind of blank that made you forget time. Mara joined them quietly. Sensors just picked up more shifts underground. Slow but steady. They're digging again. Reeve's eyes flicked to her. How long until they're back? Hours. Maybe less. Lennox muttered, not even a bloody lunch break. Reeve turned toward the compound. Then make sure we're ready before they are. Get the sentries armed and positions reinforced. Copy that, Mara said, already moving. Later that evening, the outpost looked almost alive again. Floodlights replaced, turrets recalibrated, barricades welded shut. The survivors moved with quiet efficiency, as if repairing the world one plate at a time might somehow hold the darkness back. Reeve walked the line once more, checking the posts. Every soldier he passed looked back at him, not with hope exactly, but with that unspoken understanding. He's still here. So are we. Lennox sat perched on a stack of ammo crates, helmet off, cleaning his rifle with slow precision. You know, sir, he said, if we keep surviving at this rate, we might actually have to start celebrating. Reeve raised an eyebrow. When we make it of this rock, I'll buy you a drink. Make it a double, sir. Mara appeared beside them, datapad tucked under her arm. Scans show reduced movement underground. Could be they're resting, or planning, Reeve finished. Lennox exhaled. Here we go again. Reeve looked out across the plains, the light fading, the mist starting to roll in once more. The wind carried a low hum, the kind of sound that could have been the generator, or something else beneath the surface. Whatever they're doing, he said, voice calm, we'll be ready. The last of the daylight vanished. The floodlights came on one by one, cutting through the haze. And somewhere, far beyond the perimeter, the earth trembled again. A slow, rhythmic pulse. The siege wasn't over. It had only begun. Chapter 6, The Watchers. The outpost slept in shifts. By the time night dropped its weight over the plain, the air had turned cold and wet again, clinging to every plate of armor and metal surface. Floodlights cast long, pale cones across the mud, cutting the mist into ribbons. The rest was shadow, endless, depthless shadow. Reeve walked the inner perimeter in silence, rifle slung low, boots leaving shallow prints in the damp earth. The smell of oil and burned insulation still hung in the air from the repairs. Somewhere, a welder sparked once more before cutting off with a sharp click. He passed a group of sentries by the east barricade. Two of them, young lads from Beta Squad, were slumped against the wall, eyes half closed, rifles resting upright between their knees. "Stay sharp," Reeve said quietly. They straightened instantly, muttering apologies. He gave a small nod, not angry, just tired, and kept walking. Inside the command module, the glow from the holomap painted the room in dim blue. Lieutenant Mara sat at the console, data streams flickering across her tablet. Her dark hair was tied back roughly, streaked with dust. "Surface sensors stable," she murmured without looking up. "But there's low-level seismic noise again, same as last night. Deep, 200 to 300 meters down." Reeve leaned over her shoulder. "Same region." She nodded. "East Ridge and under the old dig site. Patterns? Nothing consistent yet. Could be minor subsidence. Could be them." Lennox, sitting nearby on a crate, had his boots propped up and was cleaning his rifle. "Could be ghosts for all we know. Planet's got that vibe." Reeve's mouth twitched. "If ghosts start chewing through plating, we'll talk." Mara finally looked up at him. "You're not sleeping either?" He shook his head. "Can't afford to. Not yet." "None of us can," she said softly. Near midnight, fog thickened. It rolled in from the plain like tide water, swallowing the fences and dulling the floodlight beams until the whole world became soft and soundless. Lennox was on watch at the west gate, helmet on, visor flicked to thermal. The world was a smear of oranges and blues, heat signatures of generators and the faint warmth of nearby soldiers. Nothing else moved. Then, a flicker. A small, fast-moving shape darted across his display. He froze, adjusted focus. Nothing. He keyed his comm. "Movement, west sector. Low to the ground. Could be wind, but..." "Wind doesn't show heat," Reeve's voice replied, flat and quiet. "Hold position." Lennox swallowed, eyes scanning. "It's gone cold now." Whatever it was, it ducked behind the outcrop. Mara's voice cut in. "Switch to motion overlay." He did. Faint ripples across the terrain appeared, subtle shifts where nothing should be moving. "I'm telling you," Lennox muttered. "There's something playing peekaboo out there." Reeve's footsteps sounded behind him as he arrived on the catwalk. "Show me." Lennox pointed toward the outer rocks. "There, between those two markers. See the low dip?" Reeve switched his visor. For a second, he saw only fog and darkness. Then a flash of movement, slender and sharp, like a shadow darting sideways. He raised his rifle. "Contact." Both men froze. The fog rippled. Then a soft click-click came from somewhere near the rocks, like claws tapping metal. "Single target?" Mara asked through comms. Reeve watched the shadows. "Not sure yet." A shape emerged briefly, smaller than the adults they'd fought. Leaner, faster. It paused, tilting its head toward the light. The armor plating along its sides was dull gray, not the hardened black shell of the full-grown predators. A juvenile. It didn't charge. It just stood there, watching. Reeve and Lennox held position, rifles trained but not firing. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted, vanishing back into the mist. "Contact lost," Reeve said. "Single juvenile. Non-aggressive." Lennox smiled. "Non-aggressive, my arse. You saw those teeth." "Eyes," Reeve said quietly. "Did you see its eyes?" Lennox frowned. "What about them?" "They were following the light." He glanced up at the flood lamp above the gate, the beam still flickering slightly. It wasn't random. It was watching how far we could see. For the next hour, nothing else moved. But the fog carried sounds, faint scratches, shifting gravel, the whisper of something brushing against metal. At one point, a sensor tripped near the north fence. 2 soldiers went to check. They found nothing but disturbed mud and a few small claw marks near the generator lines. By 0300 hours, Reeve had every squad double-posted and thermal drones sweeping the perimeter. The drones found occasional blips of motion that vanished as soon as they focused. Mara appeared beside him again, her face lit faintly blue by her datapad. "They're probing," she said simply. He nodded. "Testing us, like wolves at the fence." "Smarter than wolves." "Yeah." He looked out into the mist. "And patient." Lennox's voice came over comms, weary but steady. "Sir, you want me to keep my lads awake all night or pretend to rest?" "Rotate them," Reeve said. "No one alone. Keep comms open. If anything touches that fence, I want to know before it thinks about it." At 4:30, something new happened. A low hum rose from the ground, not from generators, but beneath them. A deep vibration, rhythmic, almost alive. Mara frowned, checking readings. Seismic spike, shallow, 40 meters under us. Movement? Yes, multiple. Slow crawl pattern. Parallel lines. Meaning? She looked up. They're moving beneath the outpost. Reeve gripped the railing, eyes narrowing. How deep can they dig? Depends on the rock density. But if they're adapting, if they've learned the soft layers, then we're sitting ducks, Lennox finished grimly. The hum faded as quickly as it came, leaving silence so complete it felt wrong. Dawn came pale and exhausted. The fog thinned, revealing the outpost half-shrouded in smoke and dew. Everyone looked drained, eyes hollow, armor streaked with grime. Reeve walked the perimeter with Mara and Lennox. The ground outside was littered with faint tracks, not large enough for the full-sized predators, but dozens of small prints circling the walls. "They came close," Mara said, crouching to study one. "Close enough to test the metal." Lennox kicked at a creat. "Cheeky little bastards, aren't they? Just out for a midnight stroll." Reeve didn't reply. He knelt, touching the edge of one print. The mud was compressed deeply, too evenly for random wandering. The pattern repeated, circling the same area. "They were mapping us," he said finally. Mara looked up. "Mapping?" "Look, the prints follow the sensor towers, the power line, the gate hinge. Every critical point. They know where the defenses are now." Lennox blinked. "You're saying they can think?" Reeve stood, eyes hard. "I'm saying they can learn." Later that morning, the command deck buzzed with low conversation. Soldiers ate ration bars in silence, the sound of chewing almost deafening in the still air. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant hung thick. Mara projected new data across the holotable. The seismic readings match what we felt last night. Shallow tunnels forming under the north and west sectors. They're not random. They're up to something. Reeve leaned in. How soon? If they keep this pattern, they'll breach within 48 hours. Lennox exhaled sharply. 48 hours? We barely survived the last time. Mara's tone stayed calm. They're learning faster than expected. Juvenile scouting, mapping, tunneling. It's coordination. That's not instinct. Reeve looked between them. Then it's intelligence. Not human, Mara said, but close enough to be dangerous. He nodded once. We'll assume the next attack isn't an attack. It's a strategy. Lennox leaned back, rubbing his face. Brilliant. Alien chess. We've got rifles. They've got brains and claws. Fair fight. Reeve shot him a look. You still got rounds left, Corporal? Plenty. Then we fight smarter. By midday, the outpost was alive again with controlled chaos. Welding sparks flew, engineers rerouted power cables, and techs buried seismic sensors deeper into the rock. Mara oversaw the sensor calibrations. Lennox organized a patrol to sweep the outer trench, just to make sure the tunnels hadn't already broken through. Reeve watched them from the wall. His eyes tracked the horizon where fog met rock, where the land seemed to breathe in shallow motions. He spoke softly, more to himself than anyone. They're adapting to the noise, the light, the heat. Next, they'll learn timing. Mara joined him, following his gaze. Meaning? They'll attack when we least expect it. Maybe not at night. In daylight. She nodded slowly. You're probably right. Lennox climbed back up the ladder. Mud spattered across his armor. Trenches are clear, for now, but you're not going to like this. He handed Reeve a shard, a piece of the creature's shell, about the size of a hand, dull gray and ridged. Found it wedged under a support strut. Looks like it scraped off when they were digging. Mara turned it over, scanning. Lighter density than the adult's armor. But see here, microfractures sealed with mineral deposits. It's regenerating. Regenerating? They're adapting their shells using the minerals from the soil. Every piece gets stronger the longer it's exposed. Lennox gave a low whistle. Lovely. So not only do they think, they upgrade. Reeve looked at the shard for a long moment, then tossed it aside. Then we stop them before they grow anymore. By evening, fatigue set in again. The sun dipped low, turning the horizon a dull red, like an ember struggling to burn through the haze. The squad ate in silence, their laughter gone quiet, their movements slower but deliberate. Reeve walked the wall one last time before rest rotation. He paused at the west gate, the same place he'd first seen the juvenile. The fog was thinner now, but the mist still clung to the rocks like smoke from unseen fires. He stood there for a while, scanning the plains. Nothing moved. No sound but the wind. Still, he could feel it. The sense of eyes on him. The faint, rhythmic vibration through the ground. Too subtle for the sensors, too deep for the ear, but they're all the same. They weren't gone. They were waiting, learning. And when they came next, there's a chance it wouldn't be in the dark. Chapter 7. The Calm and the Crack. The morning broke with a strange, fragile quiet. Smoke drifted across the yard, thin as mist, curling off shattered barricades and burned-out drones. The smell of scorched steel and ozone still hung thick in the air, mixed with the faint copper tang of blood, that hadn't yet washed away. The storm that had battered them 2 nights before was long gone, but it had left behind the same feeling. A stillness so tense it felt like the world was holding its breath. Captain Reeve walked the perimeter before sunrise, boots crunching through gravel and broken glass, rifle slung but ready. His armor was dust-streaked and cracked across one shoulder plate. The medics had patched it with epoxy until proper repairs could be made. He moved in silence, eyes scanning the horizon where the light was just starting to spill over the ridges, pale gold through a haze of dust. The outpost felt smaller now. Too many gaps in the walls. Too many empty bunks. Lieutenant Mara joined him halfway round. She carried her helmet under her arm, dark hair tied back, eyes sharp and bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Reeve," she greeted, voice low but steady. He nodded. "You sleep?" "Half an hour. Maybe." Luxury. They stopped by the west barricade, where the plating had been torn open. Engineers worked quietly, welding a fresh sheet over the gap. Sparks jumped in the air, bright against the morning gloom. Reeve crouched, tracing the ground with a gloved hand. The soil had been churned deep by claws, 6-point tracks, sharp-edged, like someone had pressed knives into the earth. But they didn't come close this time. They'd circled, tested, and pulled back. "They're learning," he murmured. Mara followed his gaze. "You think they're adapting?" He nodded. "They hit the same sector as last time, but they stopped short. They're watching us, measuring the response." She frowned, calculating. "Then we need to change the pattern before they do. I'll move second squad to the northern ridge. They'll get a wider sightline from there. Lennox can run point." "Good," Reeve said. He stood, dusted his gloves. "Let's make the rest of the day count. We might not get another quiet one." By midday, the base hummed with exhausted purpose. Engineers replaced plating and recalibrated motion sensors. Gunners cleaned weapons under the harsh light of the twin suns. The mess hall served instant coffee and cold rations. No one complained. Corporal Lennox leaned against a crate near the comms shack, chewing on a protein bar that had the consistency of sandpaper. "You ever think we're just building them better cover?" he asked Private Weller, who was tightening bolts on a turret nearby. Weller grunted. "You want to dig the trenches again? Be my guest." "Nah, I'm good. Wouldn't want to mess up your artistry, mate." Mara passed by, datapad in hand. "Corporal, less poetry, more perimeter." "Yes, ma'am," Lennox said, snapping a mock salute. When she'd gone, he muttered to Weller, "You ever notice she says everything like it's a chess move? She's the only one who knows what the board looks like." "Fair point." Lennox finished the bar, grimaced. "Tastes like compressed regret." Reeve and Mara spent most of the afternoon in the command room, a metal box reinforced with sandbags and sensor cables. The main screen flickered with radar sweeps and heat maps of the surrounding valley. Mara pointed to one feed, a drone view of the eastern approach. "Look here, last night's contact zone. We had 12 heat signatures. This morning, none now. No movement, no trails." Reeve frowned. They didn't just vanish. No, they went underground again. Or they're waiting. A pause. Both knew what that meant. They'd be hit again, and soon. The quiet wasn't peace. It was preparation. Reeve turned to another display. The ammo readouts. Supplies were low. Too low. 212 mags left total. 42 for the heavy gun. That's not enough to hold the remaining 6 days. Mara exhaled through her nose. "Then we don't hold. We adapt. Start rationing rounds, make traps, Pressure detonators, tripwires, anything that slows them down. Reeve nodded slowly. Get Lennox to start on that. He's creative with explosives when he's in a mood. Evening crept in fast. The twin suns bled into the horizon, staining the sky a deep, dirty red. Shadows stretched across the outpost, turning the wreckage into jagged silhouettes. Lennox and two others worked along the southern wall, stringing lines of homemade charges along the trench. Each one was cobbled together from spare grenades, wiring, and scavenged components. He hummed to himself as he worked, off-key, something from home that didn't belong in a place like this. "You really think this'll work?" Private Tull asked. Lennox glanced up, smirking. "If it doesn't, at least it'll look impressive when it all goes to hell." Comforting. "Hey, I aim to please." They finished the last set of charges just as night fell. Lennox wiped his hands on his armor, looking out toward the darkening hills. The valley beyond was silent, too silent. He frowned. "You hear that?" Tull listened. "Hear what?" "Exactly." By 2200 hours, the camp had settled into uneasy quiet. Most of the squad was asleep or pretending to be. The night watch manned their posts, scanning the black horizon through scope and thermal. The wind hissed across the walls, carrying dust and fragments of old ash. Inside the command room, Reeve stood over the hollow table while Mara ran diagnostics on the motion sensors. "Still nothing," she said. "Not a blip in 2 hours." Reeve rubbed his jaw. "They're out there. They don't just stop. Maybe the last wave scared them off." He shot her a look. "You believe that?" "No." "Good." They shared a silent moment, the hum of the equipment filling the space. Reeve poured 2 cups of instant coffee from a tin and handed one to her. It tasted like rust and mud, but it was hot. Mara took a sip, winced slightly. "Remind me to requisition better coffee if we ever get off this rock." "You plan on surviving that long?" "I don't plan on dying here." Reeve gave a faint, tired smile. "That's the spirit." Outside, the wind shifted. A low vibration rippled through the dirt, faint, almost imagined. One of the motion sensors on the north ridge flickered once, then went dark. Lennox, manning the overwatch tower, noticed the blip on his wrist display. He frowned, tapped the screen. "Oi, command, Tower 1 here. You seeing that drop on Ridge North?" Mara's voice came through the comm, calm but alert. "Negative. Reading stable on our end." It just blinked out. Might be the wind, or something crawling. "Hold position, Corporal. Reboot the sensor if you can." "On it." He leaned over the console, flicking the reset switch. The screen flickered, static rippling across it, then came back online, but the feed was black. No video, no heat, just darkness. "Reeve," Lennox said quietly into his comm. "You might want to take a look at this. Talk to me." "I've got nothing. No image. Like something's blocking the lens." "Blocked how?" "Like something's standing in front of it." A pause. The line crackled. Then, from the speaker, came a faint sound. A rhythmic thud. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Lennox froze, eyes narrowing at the console. "Oh, bollocks!" He swung his rifle around and looked out through the viewport, scanning the ridge. Nothing but black. Then, movement. A shape, shifting, just beyond the floodlight's reach. "Contact North Ridge," he barked. Klaxons blared through the camp. Soldiers jolted awake, scrambling for weapons. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the perimeter in harsh white light. Reeve and Mara burst from the command room, helmets on, rifles up. "Positions!" Reeve shouted. "Eyes on the north!" The lights cut across the valley, but there was nothing, just dust swirling. The ridge stood empty. Lennox climbed down from the tower, breath misting inside his helmet. "Swear I saw movement," he said. "Something big, then gone." Reeve's gaze swept the shadows. "They're testing us again." Mara adjusted her rifle. "Then they're getting bolder." The wind carried a low, distant sound through the valley, like stones grinding deep underground. Everyone went still, listening. The noise faded, then silence again. Reeve's voice was low, grim. "Double watches. No one sleeps." Lennox looked at him, jaw tight. "You think they'll hit tonight?" Reeve scanned the horizon one last time. The floodlights flickered once, just once, as if something massive had passed between them and the ridge. He didn't answer. The quiet held for the rest of the night, but it wasn't peace anymore. It was a heartbeat before the strike. Chapter 8. The fifth morning. Dawn broke over Sol IOB-007 like a wound opening in the sky. A pale, bruised light spilled across the outpost, washing over jagged barricades and the blackened wrecks of drones that had fallen on the first night. The air was still, heavy with the metallic tang of dust and burnt oil. Every sound seemed to echo too far. Boots scuffing gravel, wind whispering through cracks in the plating, like the planet itself was holding its breath. Captain Reeve stood on the command deck, helmet under one arm, mug of cold coffee in the other. He hadn't slept. No one really had. The floodlights still burned along the perimeter, throwing hard shadows across the ground. The night had been quiet again. Too quiet, but the kind of quiet that made men keep their fingers close to the trigger. Below, soldiers moved slowly, from exhaustion. They'd been through 4 days of hell. The faces that remained were hollow-eyed and pale beneath their visors, but they moved with grim determination. They'd buried more friends than they cared to count. The walls held, barely, but the enemy had been watching, learning. Reeve's steps outside. Eyes swept the valley beyond the base. The ridges were silent, the wind stirring faint trails of dust across the barren ground. No movement, no sound, but his gut said otherwise. Something was out there, crouched beneath the rocks, waiting for the moment they blinked. "Sir." Lieutenant Mara's voice broke through the static of the comm channel. "North sensors just came back online. I've recalibrated the thermal filters. We're picking up traces again." "Movement?" "Not yet. But there's residual heat in the soil, like something's been burrowing close to the surface." Reeve frowned. "Same as before?" "Same pattern, or they're mapping us." He set down his mug and clipped his helmet back on. "Meet me at the north wall." By the time Reeve reached the ridge, Mara was already there, crouched beside a portable scanner. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and ridged like old scar tissue. She tapped at the display, pulling up heat signatures, faint blotches spreading under the soil. "They're probing the perimeter again," she said. 2 meters deep, slow moving. Could be feelers, maybe scouts. Reeve knelt beside her. Or they're softening the ground. For what? He looked out at the ridge, the morning sun cutting long lines of shadow across the landscape. for digging through. Mara straightened, expression grim. If they come from below, our barricades mean nothing. Then we changed the field. Reeve tapped his comm. Lennox, get your team up here. Bring the charges. Corporal Lennox arrived 5 minutes later with 3 soldiers in tow, packs of explosives slung over their shoulders. His voice came through the helmet mic, casual as ever despite the bags under his eyes. Morning exercise then? Thought we'd try sleeping for a change. Reeve pointed to the ridge. We're reinforcing the north sector. You see that scanner feed? Lennox crouched, studied the map. The heat signatures pulsed slowly, like something breathing beneath the earth. Yeah, I see it. Ugly bastards are tunneling again. Exactly. We're lining the outer trench with seismic charges. I want a chain reaction ready to drop half the ridge if they try to come up through it. Lennox gave a lopsided grin. Now you're talking. Mara folded her arms. Keep it clean. We can't risk collapsing too much of the terrain. That ridge is our only cover if the front wall goes. Don't worry, Lieutenant, Lennox said, picking up a shovel. I'll blow it up artistically. By noon, the camp was alive again with grim purpose. The rhythmic clatter of tools echoed through the yard as soldiers and engineers reinforced plating, rewired sensors, and dug fresh trenches. The dust rose thick around them, clinging to armor and visors. Every movement carried the dull ache of exhaustion, but no one stopped. Reeve and Mara worked side by side near the command hub, going over updated defense grids. They'd adjusted firing zones, tightened patrol rotations, and doubled the watch. On paper, the outpost looked ready. In reality, it was barely holding together. Lennox's voice crackled over the comm. Charges in place, boss. If anything sneezes under this ridge, it'll wish it hadn't. Good work, Reeve said. Hold position and keep your eyes open. Aye, sir, and maybe tell Mara I didn't actually blow anything up yet. Mara smirked faintly without looking up from her datapad. Tell him I'll believe that when I see it. The afternoon dragged on in oppressive silence. The heat rose to shimmering levels, the twin suns baking the metal walls until they hummed with warmth. The men moved slower, shadows lengthening as the light shifted. Reeve checked in with the comms techs, who were trying to repair the long-range transmitter. Still nothing. Just static. The relay satellites above Sol YOB-007 were either dead or blocked by atmospheric interference. They were on their own. At 1700 hours, a faint tremor rippled through the ground. Subtle, but everyone felt it. Cups rattled. Loose bolts vibrated on tables. Quake? Weller called out. Mara shook her head, watching the scanner. No, too short. Too rhythmic. Then what? Before he could finish, the motion sensors along the southern wall flared red. Lennox's voice barked over the comm. Contact, South Ridge, multiple heat signatures moving fast. Above ground this time. Reeve and Mara sprinted for the wall. The sirens wailed to life, klaxons echoing across the outpost. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, rifles snapping into ready stances. Positions! Reeve shouted. Light the ridge! Floodlights snapped on, slicing through the dusk, and the creatures appeared. They came in a blur of movement, bursting from the rocks like shadows given form. Six-legged, armored, glistening with dirt and black resin. Their carapaces reflected the light in jagged streaks. Each one was the size of a small vehicle, fast and fluid. Open fire! the air filled with gunfire, controlled bursts hammering through the night. The creatures darted and wove, their bodies moving with unnatural coordination. They didn't rush blindly this time. They fanned out, keeping low, striking in pairs. Reeve fired short, precise bursts, aiming for joints and underplates. The rifle's recoil numbed his arm. Beside him, Mara barked orders into her comm, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Left flank, push fire! Keep them in the open!" The creatures roared, a low, guttural sound that rattled the chest cavity. One lunged at the barricade, claws scraping across metal as it tried to pull itself up. Weller tossed a grenade. It exploded beneath the creature's body, tearing it apart in a shower of debris. Another creature darted from the side, fast as lightning, slamming into a gunner's nest. The man screamed before being dragged down, his rifle clattering against the wall. Blood sprayed the floodlights in a wide arc. Lennox triggered the charges on the southern trench. The explosion tore through the earth, lighting up the night. Dust and flame erupted skyward, the shockwaves slamming against their armor. A creature half buried in the trench screeched and collapsed, limbs twitching. "Good hit!" Reeve yelled. "Still more coming!" Lennox shouted back. They were everywhere now, circling, flanking, pressing from multiple directions. The sensors flickered, alarms blaring in every sector. Mara ducked behind cover as a creature's claws slammed into the barricade above her. "They're splitting our focus. They're driving us back toward the center." Reeve reloaded, voice sharp. "Fall back to secondary line. Keep formation." They retreated in teams of two, firing, moving, covering each other. The outer wall shuddered under the impact of claws and bodies. Panels buckled, metal screamed. One of the soldiers tripped, a creature barreling toward him. Then a burst of gunfire from above cut it down. Lennox, perched on the tower, yelled, "You're welcome." The creature hit the dirt, twitching. Smoke rising from the holes burned through its body. For a moment, the gunfire eased. The creatures hesitated at the edge of the light, pacing, watching. Then, slowly, they began to withdraw, slipping back into the darkness beyond the ridge. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Reeve lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Smoke drifted across the yard, mixing with dust and burnt ozone. "Status?" he asked. "3 wounded, 1 dead," Mara said, voice steady. "Perimeter holding, but we've lost the south fence sensors. Half the charges are spent." Reeve nodded grimly. "They're probing us. That wasn't an attack. It was reconnaissance." Lennox hopped down from the tower, wiping dust from his visor. "You're telling me that wasn't the main event?" "Afraid not," Reeve said. "They're seeing how we respond. Next time they'll hit where we're weakest." Mara looked to the horizon. "Then we find where that is before they do." The wind picked up again, dry, carrying a faint, strange smell, like rot and ozone. Reeve turned his head, eyes narrowing toward the dark ridges. Out there, something moved. Just for a second. A shimmer of heat against the dusk, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Reeve raised his rifle, but there was nothing left to see. "Everyone back to posts," he ordered. "We're not done yet." As the squad dispersed, Mara lingered beside him, eyes on the same stretch of darkness. "They're changing tactics," she said quietly. Reeve didn't answer. He didn't need to. The night ahead was going to be long, and somewhere in that valley, the enemy was learning faster than they were. Chapter 9, the 6th morning. The outpost looked like it had been through a lifetime of war. Smoke curled lazily from blackened barricades, and the ground was littered with twisted panels and burnt-out drones. The morning sun, thin and pale, filtered through a haze of dust that hung low over the camp. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of ash. The air smelled of iron, fuel, and something faintly rotten. The scent of last night's battle lingering in every breath. Captain Reeve stood near the shattered section of the southern wall, helmet clipped to his belt, his eyes scanning the horizon. He hadn't said much since dawn. His armor was scarred and streaked with dust. The once gray plates dulled almost brown. A few meters away, soldiers were dragging debris into makeshift barricades, stacking what was left of the prefabs to seal the gaps. Lieutenant Mara moved among them, steady and composed as always, though her face looked older under the dim morning light. She directed with quiet precision, never raising her voice, never showing the fatigue that weighed on her like armor. Every order she gave was practical, grounded. It kept the others steady, the illusion of control holding the line more than any wall could. "Charge line set?" Reeve asked, his voice hoarse. "North and west are live," Mara replied, brushing dust from her gauntlet. "South's compromised, but Lennox says he's got something creative planned." Reeve smirked faintly. "That usually means we're about to lose another wall." "Probably," Mara said, then glanced toward the watchtower. "But if anyone can keep that side standing, it's him." Corporal Lennox was indeed busy, half-crouched in the rubble, hands deep in a nest of cables. His armor was caked in soot, and one of his gloves was patched with duct tape. A cigarette burned between his teeth, the smoke curling into his visor as he worked. He glanced up when Reeve approached. "Morning, Cap, or whatever counts as morning on this rock. Coffee's gone cold again." Reeve crouched beside him. "You're still alive. That's good enough." "Barely," Lennox muttered. He gave the bundle of cables a sharp tug, and a row of jury-rigged mines flickered to life along the southern trench. "There. Won't win any engineering awards, but if they come sniffing round again, they'll get a surprise." "Nice work," Reeve said. Lennox grinned, weary but proud. "You're not wrong about surprise. Half of this lot's wired with prayer and blind optimism." Reeve gave a quiet laugh. It felt strange, almost foreign. "That's standard procedure now, isn't it?" "Pretty much. Speaking of optimism..." Lennox sat back on his heels, looking toward the smudged horizon. "How many days left before relief gets here, you reckon?" Reeve didn't need to check his wrist display. 4. Lennox whistled low. 4 days. Bloody hell. Feels like we've been here a lifetime. "Feels longer," Reeve said. "Think the relief will actually come?" Reeve met his eyes. "They'll come." "You sound sure." "I have to." The midday heat settled like a weight over the camp. They worked in near silence, repairing what they could, stripping weapons for parts, and patching armor with whatever wasn't melted beyond use. No one complained anymore. They were past that stage. Words had become a waste of strength. At one point, Mara joined Reeve beneath the shade of a scorched comms tower. She passed him a canteen. The water inside was warm and metallic, but he drank it anyway. "How's the South Line?" she asked. "Held together by Lennox's creativity." "That's either good or disastrous." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Bit of both." She glanced out toward the valley. The land beyond shimmered in the heat, jagged shadows stretching long and thin. "We've seen no movement since last night." "They're licking their wounds," Reeve said, "or watching us lick ours." Mara lowered her gaze. "We lost 6 more." Reeve didn't answer at first. The silence between them was heavy, but familiar. They'd all lost people. Names blurred together after a while. "Get them logged," he said quietly, "and take their tags." She nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "You ever think about what happens after this?" He looked at her. "You mean if we make it out?" "Yeah." He took a slow breath, glancing toward the jagged skyline. "I'll probably spend a month sleeping. Then I'll put in a transfer to somewhere cold. Snow, mountains, no mud." Mara smiled faintly. "You'd last a week before missing the noise." He gave a quiet laugh. "Probably." They stood in silence for a while, the wind humming through the cracked metal around them. Then the sound of laughter, real laughter, drifted across the yard. Lennox was sitting with a few of the surviving privates, sharing a tin of ration beans and a flask of something that definitely wasn't regulation. The mood was light, not joyous exactly, but human again. "4 bloody days," he was saying. "That's all. We've just got to keep breathing until the cavalry shows up. Piece of cake." One of the younger soldiers, face still streaked with dust, gave a tired grin. "Think they'll actually make it through the storms?" "They'll make it," Lennox said firmly. "Command will send something big, you'll see. Dropships, air cover, probably a big shiny officer with clean boots to tell us how lucky we are." The group chuckled. "Maybe they'll even bring decent coffee," another added. "Now that," Lennox said, raising his flask, "would make all this worth it." They laughed again, the sound cracked and raw but genuine. It carried across the camp, small and defiant against the silence of the planet. Reeve and Mara watched from a distance. "Still finding reasons to laugh," she said quietly. "That's why they're still alive," Reeve replied. As the day wore on, the work slowed. The heat faded into the long orange dusk, shadows stretching across the yard. The crew gathered by the main fire pit, a circle of cracked fuel barrels and metal sheets welded together, and placed more fuel into the flames. No words, just silence and the soft hiss of burning wood. The firelight danced across their faces, flickering against armor pitted with scars. After a long moment, Lennox broke the silence. "Few more days," he said quietly, voice carrying in the still air. "That's all we need to hold. Few more days, and we're on a shuttle home." Reeve looked into the fire. 4 days. Mara nodded. "We can do 4 more days." For the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't sound like false hope. Night came slow and silent. The floodlights hummed back to life, casting long spears of light across the ruined outpost. The horizon glowed faintly with storms in the distance, lightning flashing low under the clouds. Reeve made his final rounds, walking the perimeter with his rifle slung across his chest. The soldiers nodded as he passed, exhausted, dirty, but still standing. At the north wall, Lennox leaned against a crate, staring out into the dark. He offered a tired grin. "Quiet night?" "So far," Reeve said. Lennox gestured toward the sky. "You ever notice how bright it's getting up there?" Reeve followed his gaze. Beyond the thin veil of clouds, the faint glimmer of orbital lights flickered. Satellites, or maybe something more. Could be the relay coming back online, Lennox said. Could be the rescue ships. Could be, Reeve replied. He didn't say what else it could be. He didn't need to. They stood in silence for a moment, the faint wind carrying the scent of dust and ozone. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the plains. Lennox smiled tiredly. Captain. Reeve nodded, eyes on the horizon. The lights of the outpost burned steady through the night, fragile beacons in the vast, empty dark. And for the first time in days, there was no screaming, no gunfire, no tremor beneath the earth, only silence and hope. Chapter 10. The Seventh Morning. The wind was quieter that morning, but the silence that followed it was worse. A pale, colorless dawn crept across the outpost. Soft light falling over broken walls, twisted metal, and the half-collapsed communications tower. The storm had passed in the night, but it left behind a stillness that settled deep in everyone's bones. The kind that made every sound carry, every creak of armor or distant echo sound like a warning. Captain Reeve stood on the edge of the barricade, staring out toward the jagged ridgelines. The horizon shimmered faintly with heat, even in the early hour. Dust caught the light in slow, drifting veils. Behind him, the camp was waking, slow, heavy movements. No one really slept anymore. Lieutenant Mara was already at the comms table, her expression drawn tight as she scrolled through the morning reports. Corporal Lennox approached, yawning around a half-burnt ration bar, his armor still dusty from the last patrol. "Morning, Cap," Lennox muttered, voice rough. "If you can call it that." Reeve didn't turn. "How many hours radio silence from Patrol 6? Lennox's smirk faded. 4 and counting. They were due back before first light. Mara looked up from the screen. No comms, no transponder. Last ping was at the northern perimeter. Could be interference again. That ridge plays hell with the signals. Or worse, Reeve said. He finally turned. His eyes were red-rimmed, the lines on his face deeper now, carved by a week of exhaustion and loss. They moved out 15 minutes later, Reeve, Mara, Lennox, and 4 others. The air was dry and metallic, tasting faintly of ozone. The ground crunched under their boots, thin frost crackling over the dirt. The path north wound through broken machinery and jagged rock outcroppings. Dried mud painted the ground in streaks from where the last storm had flooded through. Nothing moved except the faint shimmer of dust devils far out on the flats. Lennox swept the scanner across the terrain. Still nothing. No thermal, no movement. Just us and the wind. "Keep your eyes open," Reeve said. "They've gone quiet before." Mara checked her wrist display. Their route took them up to the perimeter ridge, then east along the outflow trench. If they were ambushed, that's where it would have happened. They crested the ridge within the hour. From up there, the outpost looked small, a cluster of concrete and metal clinging to the valley floor. Beyond it, the barren expanse stretched out for miles. The mining fields glittered faintly under the rising sun, untouched and silent. Reeve's gaze settled on something below, a flicker of movement, not alive, just reflective. He raised his rifle scope. "Got something," he said. Down near the trench, a line of gear lay scattered, a helmet half buried in dust, a rifle snapped in two. They descended fast. The smell hit first, faint, metallic, old blood dried on the rock. Then they saw the tracks. Heavy drag marks gouged through the sand, leading off toward a ravine. The prints weren't human, 6-legged, deep, spaced wide apart. Mara crouched, her fingers brushing the edge of a cracked comm unit. "They fought," she said quietly. "Hard, but there's no bodies." Lennox scanned the horizon, rifle raised. "That's the bit I don't like." Reeve knelt beside the torn gear. "Positions." "3 spread across this line," Mara said, "covering fire arcs. They were holding a perimeter." She looked up. Whatever hit them, it came from underneath. There was a sound then, faint, wet, almost human. A low groan carried on the wind. Lennox spun toward it, rifle up. "Movement! 11 o'clock!" They spread out, rifles ready. A shape crawled from behind a shattered transport hull. A figure half covered in mud, armor torn open at the shoulder. Reeve moved first. "Hold fire!" The figure collapsed face first into the dirt. Private Harlan was barely conscious when they reached him. His breathing came in ragged gasps, every word a struggle. His helmet visor was shattered, eyes wild beneath a streak of blood and grime. "Easy," Reeve said, crouching beside him. "You're safe. You're back with us." Harlan tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Mara knelt beside him, injecting a stabilizer into his arm. His pulse flickered on her wrist display. Weak, erratic. Lennox kept watch, scanning the ravine. "We need to move, Cap. Now." Reeve nodded. "Get him up." They carried Harlan between them, heading back toward the ridge. "The whole way," he muttered, half words, fragments that made no sense. "They came from below. No warning. The ground." Reeve tightened his grip. "Save your strength. Tell me when we're back inside." But as they climbed, Harlan's eyes flicked open, wild and glassy. "They took them. All of them. They waited." "Waited for what?" Reeve asked. Harlan just stared past him. "For us to come back." Back inside the outpost, the airlock sealed behind them with a hiss. The metallic thump echoed through the corridor. Harlan was laid out on a stretcher in the med bay, one of the few rooms still intact. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. Reeve stood beside Mara, who cleaned the blood from the young soldier's face. He looked barely 25, pale, wide-eyed, hands trembling even in unconsciousness. "He's dehydrated," Mara said. "Minor lacerations, bruising, shock. Nothing critical." Reeve frowned. "Then why's he shaking like that?" "Because he saw something we haven't yet." It took an hour before Harlan was coherent enough to speak. When he did, his voice came in short, clipped bursts. The others gathered: Reeve, Mara, Lennox, and a few from the surviving team. "They hit us at 0300, Harlan began, staring at the floor. No sound. 1 second we're scanning the trench. Next, the ground caves in. Just gone. Carter fell first, then Jin. I heard them screaming, then nothing." "Did you see them taken?" Reeve asked. Harlan nodded. "Dragged under, like the earth swallowed them." He rubbed at his eyes, voice trembling. "We fired into the hole, thought we got one. Then the lights went out. They must have jammed the sensors. Everything went black. Couldn't see a thing. They came up behind us." Lennox frowned. "Behind? You sure?" "Positive," Harlan whispered. They were moving together. Not random, coordinated. One went for the comms, one for the flank. They knew exactly where we were. Mara's jaw tightened. You're saying they planned it. Harlan looked up, eyes hollow. They waited until we split the patrol. They learned how we move. Silence hung in the medbay. Even the air recyclers seemed to pause. Reeve finally spoke. How did you get away? Harlan swallowed hard. Ran. Hid under the crawler wreck. They didn't follow. I think they wanted me to. Reeve exchanged a look with Mara. Wanted you to? So you'd find me, Harlan said. So you'd come here. The room went cold. Lennox exhaled slowly. Right. Well, that's bloody comforting. Mara tapped into the outpost sensors, eyes flicking over the flickering data feed. There's nothing on motion scan. Nothing underground within 100 meters. Reeve stared at the floor for a long moment. They're watching us, testing, waiting for the next move. Lennox leaned against the wall, forcing a smirk. Maybe they're just shy. No one laughed. By afternoon, Harlan was stable, though he refused to sleep. He sat upright on the medcot, clutching a blanket around his shoulders, staring at the floor. Every so often, he'd flinch at a sound no one else heard. Reeve came to check on him. You did good out there, he said quietly. You got back. That counts. Harlan shook his head. They're not animals, sir. Not anymore. Reeve didn't answer. He just stood there for a long while, the hum of the generator filling the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Get some rest. We'll need every man we've got. As Reeve left, Harlan looked up. You don't get it. They don't want to wipe us out. They want to see how we fight. Night fell in silence. The outpost lights burned dim through the haze, casting long shadows across the walls. Reeve and Mara stood on the watchtower, scanning the dark beyond the floodlights. The stars were faint tonight, drowned by the dust haze. The last 7 days has been rough, Mara said quietly. 3 to go until relief. Reeve nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. If they make it through the dust storms, they will. Tell that to the dead. Mara looked at him, tired but steady. You're not the only one carrying the weight, Reeve. But if those things are getting smarter, we need to be smarter faster. We start countermeasures tomorrow. Reeve gave a faint nod. Traps, motion mines, maybe perimeter sensors in the ravine. Lennox's voice crackled over comms from below. Cap, you might want to see this. They climbed down. Lennox was standing near the outer gate, rifle lowered, pointing toward the dirt just beyond the floodlight's edge. There, half buried in the sand, was something small and metallic. Reeve knelt, brushing dust away. It was a helmet. Human issue. Fresh blood inside the visor. He turned it over. The wind picked up, carrying a low sound from the darkness beyond. Not a roar, not a screech. Something slower, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Reeve stood slowly, eyes narrowing into the night. They're here again, he said quietly. And they're closer than before. Chapter 11. The 8th day. The morning light was a sickly gray, filtered through a haze of fine dust that clung to the air and dulled the horizon. The outpost was quiet. Not peaceful, just still, like the planet itself was holding its breath. Captain Reeve stood at the observation post, eyes scanning the ridgelines beyond the wire. He hadn't slept more than an hour. None of them had. His armor still carried streaks of mud and blood from yesterday's recovery. He hadn't cleaned them off. It felt wrong, too. Below, the squad moved in silence. A handful of soldiers methodically checking barricades, reinforcing sandbag walls, replacing damaged floodlight panels. Their movements were slow but deliberate. The exhaustion had set in, but so had something else. Discipline born of survival. Reeve exhaled through his nose, scanning again through his binoculars. Nothing moved. Not a gust, not a flicker. The creatures had vanished again. That was always worse. He keyed his comm. "Mara? Status on the new sensors?" Her voice came through, calm but clipped. "Still calibrating. The perimeter grid is active but patchy. We'll need to extend the north relay if we want full coverage." "Do it. Take Lennox and 2 others." "Copy." He lowered the comm, watching as she and Lennox crossed the compound below. Even from up here, he could see the stiffness in her stride, tired but controlled. Lennox, as always, tried to mask it with swagger. He tossed a small salute toward Reeve's tower, a faint grin cutting through the grime. Reeve didn't return it. He turned his eyes back to the ridge. "Mara." The air shimmered with heat by the time they reached the north relay point, a small mound of half-buried metal that had once been a perimeter scanner. Now it was half-melted and dead, the casing burned out from the last lightning surge. Lennox crouched beside it, prying the cover open with his knife. "Right then. Let's see what's left of you." Private Hale and Sergeant Ruiz flanked them, rifles scanning the distance. The dust had thickened again, turning everything beyond 50 meters into a pale blur. Mara knelt beside Lennox, laying out the replacement components. "Careful with the grid coupler. If it arcs, you'll lose a hand." "Cheers for the warning," he muttered, sweat beading under his collar. "You know, for a lieutenant, you've got a real talent for understatement." "I prefer results to speeches." He smirked. "Yeah, I noticed." The scanner beeped softly as the new relay powered up. The display flickered, then stabilized, a faint humming spreading through the earth beneath them. Mara checked her wrist display. "North grid active. Linking now." She paused. The readings were strange, faint oscillations underground, rhythmic but irregular, like something moving slowly far below them. "Lennox," she said quietly, "you seeing this?" He leaned over, frowning at the data. Could be interference, could be... The signal spiked. A brief pulse, then gone. Mara froze. Something's down there. "Then let's hope it stays there," Lennox muttered. They made it back to the compound by midday. The heat was oppressive, dry and suffocating, a constant reminder that the planet wasn't built for human lungs. Reeve was waiting near the central barricade, his rifle slung across his back, a map spread over a supply crate. "Report!" Mara pointed to the readings. "We've got movement signatures under the north ridge. Nothing breaking surface yet, but they're down there." Reeve studied the data, jaw tightening. "How many?" "Couldn't tell. 2, maybe 3. Could be one moving fast." Lennox leaned against the crate. "Or could be them playing with us again. You know, getting the lay of the land." Reeve looked up. "They're not playing. They're preparing." Lennox's grin faded. "Aye, feels that way." Lennox. The afternoon dragged on like a bad dream. The heat shimmered off the metal walls, turning the compound into an oven. Every shadow looked too deep. every sound too close. Lennox worked the west barricade with 2 privates, welding a reinforcement plate into place, sweat running down his neck. He tried to keep the mood light. "You ever notice," he said, voice muffled by the welding mask, "how we're building this place up like we plan to live here? Because I don't fancy retirement on this bloody rock?" Private Marks gave a weak grin. "Beats paperwork, sir." "Barely." The torch sputtered out. Lennox lifted the mask, squinting through the haze. "You lot ever get that feeling? Like the air's listening?" Marks frowned. "Listening?" "Yeah. Like when you say something stupid, and the universe decides to make it true." Ruiz's voice crackled over comms. "We're getting faint motion near your sector. Check the outer trench." Lennox straightened, rifle in hand. "Copy that." He climbed the wall, scanning the outer ground. The trench beyond was empty, just loose dust, rocks, and old shell casings. Then something flickered. A brief shimmer under the sand. "Movement," he whispered. He signaled Marks to hold position and peered through the scope. A single shape far out, maybe 50 meters. The light bent oddly around it, like heat haze given form. Then it sank, soundless, disappearing beneath the surface. Lennox exhaled slowly. "Reeve, we've got one. Lone contact, West Trench. Went under." Reeve's voice came back calm but firm. "Copy. Don't engage. Let it move." "Let it move?" Lennox muttered. "Bloody marvelous plan." He stayed there another minute, watching the sand settle. Nothing else moved. But the feeling didn't go away. That crawling sense that something was watching him back. Harlan. Private Harlan sat in the medbay, knees pulled up, staring at the cracked floor. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. He kept telling himself he was safe, that he was inside walls, surrounded by soldiers, rifles, light. It didn't help. He could still hear them, that scraping, chittering rhythm, the way they moved under the ground like water. He'd tried to sleep, but every time his eyes closed, he saw Carter's hand vanishing into the dirt. He looked at the monitor across from him, the perimeter feed. The static came and went, little bursts of interference. Sometimes he swore he saw movement in it, shapes like shadows swimming just beyond the light. He leaned forward, tapping the side of the screen. "Come on, show me." The feed flickered. For half a second, the static parted. There, a dark shape low to the ground, moving fast along the trench line. Not charging, not attacking, just circling. Harlan stood, his pulse quickened. He keyed the comm. "This is Harlan in medbay. I've got movement on the west camera, 1 contact." Reeve's voice answered almost immediately. "We see it. Stay put." But Harlan didn't sit back down. He moved to the window slit, staring out at the dust haze. Nothing but shimmering light. He whispered to himself, voice shaking, "They're testing us again." Reeve. By evening, the compound was on full alert. Every man on the walls, every light burning. The tension was a live wire running through the air. Reeve moved along the battlements, checking positions. The new sensors pinged softly, registering small tremors underground. Erratic, circling the perimeter. Never closing in. He stopped beside Mara, who was reviewing the feed on her wrist display. "Still 1 contact?" "Still 1, she said. It's not attacking. It's mapping us. Like Harlan said. She nodded. If they're learning patterns, we need to change ours. Rotate watches irregularly, move supplies, alter lighting sequences, make it unpredictable. Reeve gave a faint smile. You think like them. Someone has to. Below, Lennox and his team were setting the last of the trip mines. The sun dipped low, bleeding red across the sky. It should have been beautiful, but it wasn't. It just looked like the world was rusting. As the light faded, the sensors went quiet. For a moment, the whole compound stood still. No wind, no sound, just that waiting silence that pressed in on all sides. Then, a faint vibration underfoot. Reeve froze. Contact? Mara glanced at the readings. No, deeper, farther out. Lennox's voice crackled over the comm. Cap, we're getting ground tremors on the West Trench. Big ones. The ground shuddered, a deep, distant rumble that rolled through the base. Metal rattled. Loose sand trickled from the walls. Positions! Reeve shouted. The tremor faded as quickly as it came. Silence. Then, nothing. No movement. No dust. Just stillness again. Lennox's voice came back, low and uneasy. That wasn't an attack. Reeve's eyes narrowed toward the horizon. No, that was a test. Later that night, the floodlights buzzed against the darkness. Reeve sat alone in the command post, helmet on the table beside him. The reports were laid out in front of him, lines of sensor data and half-corrupted camera logs. Every pattern was clear now. The movements, the pacing, the spacing of attacks. It wasn't random. It was strategy. He heard footsteps behind him, Mara again. She placed a ration tin on the table. You haven't eaten. He gave a small shrug. Neither have you. Fair point. She sat across from him, the faint glow of the console lighting her face. 3 days, she said quietly. Then relief should be here. Reeve looked at her, weary but steady. If the creatures don't figure out how to bring this whole place down first. Mara's gaze didn't waver. Then we make sure they don't. Reeve nodded slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They're getting bolder, smarter. They're thinking in patterns. We need to get ahead of it. He leaned back, the chair creaking. Tomorrow, we fight them on our terms. Outside, the wind began to rise again, low, steady, almost like breathing. Harlan lay awake in the medbay, staring at the ceiling. Lennox sat on the barricade, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the dark. Mara checked the monitors one last time before turning in, and out beyond the lights, in the open dust plains where the sensors couldn't reach, the ground began to shift. Small mounds, dozens, moving closer. Chapter 12, the 9th day. The morning light was pale and brittle, seeping through the dust-choked haze that clung to the outpost like a shroud. The air smelled of burnt metal, scorched earth, and the tang of dried blood, a reminder that the night's attack had left its mark. Silence hung over the compound, heavy and watchful, broken only by the clatter of boots and the occasional hiss of welding torches as the survivors patched barricades and repaired turrets. Captain Reeve stood on the command platform, eyes scanning the horizon. The ridges beyond the perimeter were quiet, too quiet, and his gut told him it was the calm before the storm. His armor was streaked with grime, the scratches and dents from last night's engagement, marking the passage of time, of survival, of small victories against relentless predators. Lieutenant Mara joined him, carrying a datapad flickering with sensor readings and structural assessments. Her expression was taut, composed, but the redness around her eyes betrayed the sleepless hours. "Morning report," Reeve said without looking up. "4 wounded," Mara said, voice low. "1 serious, minor internal injury, but he'll make it if we keep him stable. The rest are bandaged and able to fight. Our defensive reinforcements are holding, but the north wall still has a weak point near the eastern ridge. I patched what I could." Reeve nodded. "How long until relief?" "Tomorrow," Mara replied quietly. "We've got 1 day, 1 full day to survive, hold the line, and make sure the outpost is still standing when they arrive." He let the words hang. 1 day. That was all. Every misstep, every hole, every misjudged move from here on out could cost them everything. "Then we make it count," he said. "Every corridor, every choke point, every approach. We fight on our terms." Down below, Corporal Lennox was crouched on a crate, cleaning the dust and alien residue from his rifle. He glanced up at Reeve and Mara. "You know, I think this might actually be the final exam," he muttered. "All the other crap? Practice drills." Mara didn't smile. Reeve didn't respond. Lennox's smirk faded as he considered the weight of it, the truth that everyone here understood but no one dared say aloud. Harlan sat nearby, hands trembling slightly as he checked his weapon. He had survived the missing patrol, survived the last night's chaos, and yet the fear in his eyes remained fresh, sharp. "Sir," he said quietly, voice barely audible. "They're out there, waiting." Reeve nodded. "We know." By mid-morning, the command room hummed with activity. Sensors were recalibrated, barricades reinforced, and every section of the outpost was checked for weak points. Reeve and Mara moved between the tactical boards, plotting choke points, fallback positions, and lines of fire. "Floodlights are repositioned," Mara said. 2 sectors near the eastern wall still flicker. I've rigged them to fail last if we need them as a distraction. Reeve studied the map. "Good. That eastern ridge, if they try to flank, we force them through the kill zone along the south corridor. That's where they meet our strongest fire." Lennox leaned over the table beside them, fingers tapping against the metal. "If they're smart, they'll avoid it. But if they're coordinated like last night, well, that's why we set traps." "Exactly," Mara said. "They'll test our lines again tonight, but we'll be ready." Reeve gave a tight nod. "We've got 1 day. We cannot afford hesitation, mistakes, or wasted shots. Everyone stays alert. Every sector has a cover point. Every corridor has a fallback, and no one moves alone." Afternoon crept in slowly, the sun a dull smear behind dust and smoke. The survivors moved with mechanical efficiency, patching walls, checking weapons, moving ammo to strategic points. The outpost felt alive, breathing in the tension and dread that had settled over it like fog. Reeve walked the north wall with Mara and Lennox, rifles slung but ready. He gestured to the terrain beyond the wire. "See those ridges? That's where they'll form. They're not charging blindly anymore. They wait, they study, they'll pick the moment to strike." "They've learned," Mara said, eyes scanning the far horizon. "We've been doing this long enough for them to adapt. They're smarter than last time." Lennox tapped the barrel of his rifle, frowning. "Smarter, sure, but slower. They still have to move, still have to come to us. Reeve let the words settle. They'll come, and when they do, we hit them as hard as we can. Hold as long as we have to. Tomorrow, relief lands. We just have to survive until then. The three of them stood in silence, the wind carrying a faint metallic tang, the distant hills eerily still. By late afternoon, the preparations were nearly complete. Barricades were stacked, turrets manned, and sensors readied to trigger at the slightest movement. Reeve and Mara reviewed each choke point again, double-checking lines of fire, traps, and fallback positions. "Everything ready?" Lennox asked, leaning against the wall, tone dry but tense. "As ready as we'll ever be," Mara said. Reeve nodded. "One last sweep of the perimeter. Make sure no weak points remain. After that, we hunker down and wait for nightfall." They moved through the outpost, checking corners and stairwells, watching each other and the few remaining soldiers move like ghosts through a war-torn house. The tension was almost visible, a heavy pulse in the air. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley, Reeve returned to the command platform. Mara joined him, scanning the ridges for any sign of movement. Lennox stood nearby, rifle ready, eyes sharp. For a while, nothing stirred. Then faint vibrations hummed through the ground, subtle at first, but growing stronger, rhythmic. A low, collective rumble like distant thunder echoed across the valley. Mara keyed the sensor feed. "Something's out there," she murmured. "Too many readings to be false. They're moving. En masse." Reeve's jaw tightened. "Figures. Just when we thought they'd given us a breather." The floodlights flickered, then steadied. In the dim glow, shadows shifted at the edges of perception. Shapes, enormous and angular, moved with deliberate patience across the ridges. Lennox whispered, "Here we go. Big one, coming in slow." The rumble intensified, a chorus of movement through the valley. The survivors moved into their final positions, rifles trained, turrets armed, minds set. Every eye scanned the horizon, every muscle tensed. The outpost was ready. And so was Reeve. Night fell. The valley became a black sea, and the creatures waited just beyond the floodlight edges, their armor glinting faintly in the weak beams. Their six-legged forms shifted, spreading across the ridges, spreading across the fields, encircling the outpost with silent menace. Reeve, Mara, and Lennox stood shoulder to shoulder on the platform, watching the shadows stretch and shimmer. "They're testing us," Mara said, "waiting for a weakness." Reeve didn't answer. He tightened his grip on the railing, eyes fixed on the darkness. Lennox exhaled slowly. "Well, one day left, eh? Let's hope we make it to that sunrise." The wind rose again, carrying distant rumbles through the valley. The survivors held their positions, silent but ready. Every nerve on edge, every weapon loaded, every trap set. Somewhere in the darkness, movement shifted, distant and coordinated. The creatures were ready. Reeve didn't flinch. He only whispered, "Then let them come." And with that, the night swallowed the outpost, holding it in a tense, uneasy pause, the calm before the largest, deadliest assault yet. Chapter 13. Nightfall and First Strike. Night came like a falling weight, not sudden but inevitable. The last thin light along the ridges snuffed out as dust and smoke thickened into a blanket. The outpost's floodlights burned their last white arcs, searching for movement that had already melted back into the dark. Men moved like shadows in the light, every motion rehearsed into muscle, every command stripped down to necessity. Check the line, load the feed, hold the channel. Captain Reeve rode the command platform like a captain on a listing ship. From up here, he could see the world in slices. The wire, the outer trench, the ridges bathed in failing light, the flicker of silhouettes that were not quite animals and not quite machine. He watched them line up, low, patient, an ocean of blacked carapaces cresting the skyline. The sensor grid had warned them, but warnings are thin things when the ground starts moving under the feet of the enemy. "Sound off," Reeve said into his throat mic. The line below replied, "Weapons hot, turrets manned, charges armed, medbay standing by." The voices were stripped of everything that wasn't duty. Only the radio pockets hummed. The rest of the world held its breath. Mara moved along the grated walkway beside him with the efficiency of a woman who slept in 5-minute bursts. She had 3 feeds open on her wrist: thermal sweeps, seismic spikes, and the last patchwork image from a drone whose lens had been peppered with grit. She handed him the holo. "They're moving in layers," she said. "Outer scouts first, then the heavier ones. They tested our lights earlier to map crossfire zones. Now they'll try to banish the light and come in blind. In packs." Reeve watched the holo. The little red pings thickened on the screen, then bled into one another like a stain. "We hold the wire until they hit it. Let them chew the outer ring. When they commit, we seal them into the kill zone and burn the field." "That means we give up some perimeter," Mara said. "We can't stop them all, not with what's left." "Then we give them what we can pay for in blood," Reeve said. "We buy time." He met her gaze. "We buy until dawn, until relief hits. Nothing else." Lennox came up on the ladder behind them, mask pulled back, eyes hollow, but something like a grin wrenched into place. "So we die slow or die fast?" he asked, voice equal parts bravado and bone-deep tiredness. "We don't die at all," Reeve said, too sharply, and the words were more command than comfort. The first wave arrived like a storm hitting a cliff. It began with the earth, a deep animal groan that ran through metal plates and teeth, followed by the thunder of bodies. The floodlights caught them as they rose over the ridge, 6 legs working like pistons, plates overlapping like shingled stone, mouths working wet and hungry. They were not one thing, but battalions, runners at the front, brutes in the center, something like commanders probing with slow, bright sensors on their foreheads. The first impact against the outer wire was a physics problem writ in living muscle. The creatures didn't rush so much as batter and press, a long, sustained pressure intended to find a seam. Turrets opened up in a disciplined arc, belts of tracer tracing their path, rounds smacking against chitin and sometimes punching through to stop smaller forms. The outer charges went off at Reeve's count, puking flame and dirt into the attackers. Bodies flew. For a breath, a thin, holy breath. Fire and geometry held them back. Then they adapted. Where previous assaults had been simple rushes, this night's movers worked with staggered timing. Some drew fire, some burrowed at the soft edge of a scorch mark. Others used the confusion of concussive blasts to rout beneath the lip of the trench. The sand and rock shifted. A trench heaved as something heavy tried to lever itself up. The ground surrendered in a spray of dirt and dark ichor. A creature clambered out inside the trench, snapped a gunner in two with a strike, that made nothing dramatic of the human body, and then there was a hole in the line. "Secondary wire down!" someone screamed. "South sector, breach!" Reeve didn't pause. He barked orders that spliced the chaos into discipline. "Bring the inner heaters online. Pull the men from the east bracket inward. Lennox, with me. We seal the gap now." Lennox was already moving, a lithe shadow among the flailing, the world reduced to his breath and the iron taste in his mouth. They ran along the catwalk, boots slipping in grit, sparks scattered from shredded cable. The tracer light painted the dark world in lines that cut through flesh and shell alike. They hit the trench as two creatures tried to heave a shattered gate up. Lennox shot first, steady, and the muzzle blast rang off the metal. The creature flinched and roared, talons scraping a fresh gouge in the plating. Reeve stepped in, planted his shoulder, and unloaded a magazine into the soft joint below the carapace. The thing collapsed with a noise like a fallen tree, convulsing. "No time to look pretty," Lennox panted, handing his barrel to another man. "Fix the breach." He drove a thermite charge against the bent lip. Mara's voice came in his ear. "Burn the lip. Let the heat bake the sand. Make it uninhabitable." They detonated the charge. The fire licked and pulled like a tongue, glassing the sand into black. Screams from beyond cut through the night, the noise of bodies and the mechanical shrieks of dying carapaces. Where the glass formed was a no man's place, a place of temporary advantage cut into the earth. Inside the inner ring, the world became close and tactile. The creatures were not stupid. They used bodies as shields. They forced the men into choke points and hammered at those seams. One of the turrets seized. Servo motors howled and then froze. The men in the scribbled gun pit scattered like meat. Reeve ran through a corridor bristling with smoke, metal, and the smell of ozone. He heard Mara's voice. "Hold the corridor! Don't cluster! Fall back in pairs!" The creatures worked in pairs sometimes, one to pull, one to rip. In a narrow passageway near the communications room, a younger soldier, Tull, tried to start a fallback when a creature swung through, jaws opening like a doorway. Tull didn't die quick. The creature kept him alive, like some grotesque instrument. It pinned him, then used him as a battering ram against the next door. Reeve watched, hands shaking, and then he shot the thing point blank, the bullet spitting through viscera and chitin. Tull slid down the wall, and they dragged him to a med station that was overfull and smelling of disinfectant and burnt flesh. The med bay became a stanza of horrors and miracles, one crowded with hands. Mara herded the injured into triage with an efficiency that was almost cruel. She held an IV to a man's arm with hairline fractures, and then slapped a tourniquet hard into place with hands that did not tremble until the work stopped. The lights there flickered under load, each flicker a countdown. At one point, a heavy creature levered itself against the outer plating like some monstrous battering ram. The support gave with a shriek, and a block of the wall slid inward like a door. A man fell with it. Reeve dove, grabbed a grating, and heaved with everything he had. Around him, others did the same. They saved a life by inches. But every inch bought cost. Every saved man took fuel and bullets and time. They rotated through hell like a machine. An hour felt like a day. The ground under their boots changed from gritty to slick to sticky with the dark glassing from the thermite strikes. The creatures adapted and then adapted again. When the men dropped a tripwire field and rigged a flare burst, the attackers started snatching the flares before they hit the ground, catching flame and using the brief light to silhouette themselves for the others. At one point, Reeve found himself face to face with a juvenile. Smaller, leaner, its carapace not yet fully cemented into armor. It moved with terrifying quickness, a blur of claws that caught the light. He didn't have time to aim. He braced and the thing struck, leaving a half-stitched rag of fabric across his forearm and a pain that made the world stand still. He hit it with a single, focused shot to a weak spot it exposed when it nested its head too far. It collapsed in a tangle of limbs. Reeve tasted salt on his tongue. Not the taste of loss, but the burn of adrenaline. He looked up and found Mara there, breathing hard, face streaked with soot. "You good?" she shouted. "As good as you can be," he said. "We don't get good," she said. "We get going." Midnight folded into a darker hour and then into the early drag of the morning. The assault didn't ease, it mutated. One team used cover to swarm a generator mast, then android-like in their coordination, though they were flesh. They levered it and dropped it, sending a shower of sparks across a section of the wire. It left a black flank, a bite into the world where silence moved like a knife. At one point, Reeve heard a voice through the comm with a tone like glass breaking. "Command, East Tower compromised. Repeat, East Tower compromised." "Seal the corridor," he ordered. "Set the charges. Get people out." He saw Lennox through the smoke, moving like a man possessed, dragging a wounded corporal as the creature's talons tried to find purchase on the metal. Lennox shouldered the man like a sack and hauled him through the smoke. He passed Reeve and caught his eye for one breath, that raw, impossible grin. 2 seconds later, he was gone into a corridor that thundered with the stomping of a beast. They were losing people. They were losing sections. They were buying inches and hours, and the chance of a dawn that might mean extraction. One by one, the turrets went silent as their power reserves stuttered. The emergency generators burned with a ragged cough, and the floodlights sank to a thinner, more guttering light. The creatures shifted tactics again. Those that could crawl moved to press their advantage, slipping through blacked corridors and using the heat of men to mask movement. They were good at killing, but excellent at problem solving. They lifted collapsed beams to create crawl spaces. They understood how to use debris as ramparts. There was a moment, small, absurd, where Lennox and Reeve found themselves back to back in a corridor that smelled of burnt copper. They were both breathing hard, hands raw with work, heartbeats loud in their ears. A creature pushed at the end of the corridor, probing. Reeve fired a controlled burst, and the muzzle flare painted the metal for an instant. Lennox laughed then, short and soldier bright, a laugh torn out of a trapped chest. "Thought you said we don't die, Captain." Lennox's voice was a rasp. "I said we don't die yet," Reeve shot back. "Hold the line." Lennox's grin was something like worship. He slammed a fresh magazine home. "Aye, hold the line." They did. For a while, the corridor was their world, and they defended it like it mattered alone. But the scope of the strike revealed itself with cruel honesty. The attackers began to work the perimeter as a unit, pressure in one place, then another, probing and stretching the defenders until they found a seam. The seam appeared at dawn's furthest edge, an old maintenance lift, half jammed and corroded. When the creatures breached it, they didn't come alone. They came with an armored weight that knocked men like toys. It ripped through a parapet, and the world crashed in a noise of metal and screaming. Reeve felt the world tilt. He saw friends fall into the scramble, and he smelled the burning of something that had once been a life support vent. He felt the time slip through his fingers like warm sand. They retreated, blood on hands and faces, into a tighter ring of steel and concrete. They made barricade after barricade, welded doors, set last resort explosives. They conserved ammunition and cursed the lack of it. For every creature they stopped, 2 more would adjust and return. As the first gray of a false dawn began to silver the edges of the horizon, a lull dropped over the field. The creatures withdrew like tide going out, and the valley filled with the ragged, raw sound of survivors counting and checking. Men moved like shadows between twisted metal and broken guns, calling names off lists like prayer. They hauled the wounded into the med bay, and then, when that was full, into corners and under tarps. The air tasted of wire and burnt flesh. Reeve walked through the wreckage with a kind of slow, terrible recognition. The outer wire was shredded in 2 places outright, and charred glass coated the ground where thermite had met sand. The trench had 3 breaches. The east tower lay like a hulking ribcage. Some men were screaming into their helmets. Others were staring at nothing at all. Mara found Reeve near the north gate, leaning against cold metal, breath ragged. "Status?" he asked. "Perimeter's broken in 2 sectors," she said. "We're on the inner ring. 10 survivors, including us, but 2 are critically wounded. We don't have enough mags for another sustained push." She swallowed. They learned. They adjusted. They've got coordination. This wasn't just an attack. It was an operation. Reeve let the words sink. The light bled pale over the world. The survivors were exhausted to the bone. Their faces were maps of everything scorched and lost. "Everybody ready for what we do next?" Reeve asked. His voice was dry. Mara met his eye. "We hold the inner. We conserve our ammo. And we pray the relief sees the beacon when it comes." "You sure?" Lennox said, catching up with them, his face black with soot and grief. "Because I'm not sure about a lot, but I am sure about this. I'd rather die with you lot than disappear into the dark alone." Reeve nodded. "Then we hold." They made their last preparations with a quiet born of necessity. Tripwires set like teeth in a trap, last reserves of ammo divided like contraband, incendiaries placed to seal corridors if needed. The night had taken its pound of flesh and then demanded more. The outpost, for all its blood and smoke, still stood like a thing with a pulse. It rode the thin line between ruin and survival. At the edge of the compound, the alien bodies smoked in clumps where grenades and thermite had turned chitin into glass. The survivors counted and counted again, then rubbed their hands with oil and tried to rest for a breath that never came. Reeve looked out toward the ridges as the sky started to strip to gray. Through the haze, shapes still moved, a jigsaw shifting beyond the light. The assault had taught them something terrible. The creatures could change, learn, coordinate, and retool. They knew how to use the landscape like a weapon. He felt the weight of a decision in his chest. To hold and hope command could get a ship down, or to gamble everything on a counterstrike that might not clear the field. He closed his fist and then opened it. The decision sat there like iron. They had 1 hour left. Less if the attackers decided to stop being patient. Reeve walked back into the outpost. He passed Mara and Lennox, and for a second they did not have to say anything. The nod they shared was a pact. For dawn, for one more stand, for the hope that the sky would answer them when the time came. Night opened its mouth and swallowed the compound whole. The survivors pulled their hoods up and watched the dark breathe. Somewhere far above, a distant planet orbiter tracked across the black. Down below, the creatures rearranged themselves like an army, waiting for the last, relentless hour. Chapter 14, Midnight Furnace. The inner ring of the outpost was a furnace in every sense. Smoke curled in thick plumes from scorched floors, and the glow of thermite charges, painting corridors in flickering orange. The smell of molten metal, dust, and alien ichor clung to the walls, heavy in the air. The survivors moved like shadows along the narrow walkways, weapons slung, muscles coiled and ready. Every breath was a labor, every heartbeat a drum counting down the seconds until impact. Captain Reeve crouched behind a reinforced blast wall, scanning the junction of two corridors with thermal optics. The sensors had gone silent an hour ago, and he knew better than to trust the stillness. The first wave had battered the outer wire, and the creatures were relentless. Now they were probing every choke point, testing, adjusting, reshaping their assault in real time. "They're everywhere," murmured Mara, crouched beside him. Her hands flew over the tablet, toggling schematics and feeding live thermal readings. Eastern Tower's been partially overrun. They're in the stairwell now, working their way up. Reeve nodded. "We funnel them. Hold the corridor. Lennox with me. Mara, coordinate fallback points. Make sure anyone who falls back has cover fire." Lennox dropped beside him, smearing dust and grime across his face for camouflage. "Funnel, shoot, repeat. Got it. One thing though, do we really have enough ammo for this?" His voice was rough from smoke and adrenaline, but he managed to grin. "Because I swear we'll run dry very fast." "Make every shot count," Reeve said, sweeping the corridor with his weapon. "One shot wasted is a life gone." The first breach came with the sound of metal groaning, a sound that made Reeve's stomach tighten. A creature had lifted a grated section of floor, dropping into the passageway with a wet, deliberate thud. Its 6 legs scuttled over debris, its carapace glinting in the dim light. It paused, testing the corridor for heat signatures and human scent. Lennox fired first, a burst of tracer rounds lighting the gloom. Sparks and shards of chitin flew as the creature's forelegs struck the floor, claws scraping. Reeve followed, emptying a magazine into the soft joint under its plates. The creature collapsed, convulsing, and then another emerged, smaller, faster, darting in from the side corridor. The corridor became a river of fire and steel. The survivors' rifles cracked and flared. The creatures moved like a tide. Not one, but many, adjusting to suppressive fire, coordinating instinctively. Reeve shot, ducked, fired again. Lennox rolled past, smacking a creature aside with the butt of his rifle before firing again. Mara's voice came over the comms, calm and precise. "Secondary barricade at 70%. Prepare fallback to corridor Delta 3. Inside Delta 3, the fight became hand-to-hand. A hulking creature swung a foreleg, sending a crate of ammo tumbling. Reeve dove, feeling the talons graze his shoulder. He twisted, braced, and drove the muzzle of his rifle into the creature's chest plate. Sparks sprayed, the creature shrieked, and then staggered back, only to lunge again. Lennox came from above, smashing a makeshift baton into its joint before finishing it with a short burst. Mara arrived moments later, throwing a grenade into a side passage where a smaller pack tried to flank them. The explosion rocked the corridor, smoke and flame whipping through the narrow space. The survivors coughed, blinded, but held their positions, moving bodies out of the blast radius and checking ammo. "Status!" Reeve shouted. "2 down, 4 wounded but conscious," Mara said. "Fallback route secured. Corridor Delta 4 compromised. We'll need to seal it or we lose the inner ring." "Then seal it," Reeve said. Set charges and pull back to the crosswalk. Make it a death trap. The creatures adapted again. They didn't charge. They tested. One slipped under the thermite glassing. Another climbed a service shaft, finding soft points in the metal and concrete. Reeve and Lennox moved as a unit, shooting, slamming, pushing back against the tide. Mara coordinated from above, toggling lights, opening and closing fire doors remotely, forcing the creatures into kill zones the survivors had prepared with sweat and blood. At one point, Lennox went down, a creature's forearm slicing into his leg. Reeve dove, dragging him behind cover as claws grazed their shoulders. Mara opened fire with a turret, mowing down the attackers while Reeve applied a tourniquet. Lennox cursed and smiled despite the pain. "Next time," he gasped. "I get first pick." "Focus on surviving, not jokes," Reeve said, eyes scanning the smoke for the next threat. The fight stretched for hours. The inner ring became a crucible. Walls scorched black, floors glassed from thermite charges, turrets jammed or overheated, corridors filled with smoke and the scent of burned chitin. Every breach forced a counterattack. Every minor victory bled into exhaustion and loss. Reeve found himself in the communications room, holding the door as a pair of creatures tried to ram through. He fired, reloaded, fired again. The creatures recoiled only to surge again, testing every weak spot. Lennox joined him, dragging a fallen soldier out of the blast radius, and then they turned to face the next wave, shoulder to shoulder. Mara coordinated the fallback lines, directing survivors to secondary barricades, deploying incendiary traps that turned corridors into walls of flame. At one point, a creature pressed against a reinforced door, shaking it, claws scraping, teeth gnashing. Reeve planted a satchel charge. 3, 2, 1. The explosion rocked the corridor, sending the attacker flying and leaving the door melted and twisted. The survivors barely had time to step back before another surged in. Every engagement was a question of inches. Every breath, a gamble. Every shot, a prayer. By the small hours before dawn, the inner ring had held, but at terrible cost. The survivors were battered, bleeding, their armor scorched and dented. The corridors reeked of sweat, blood, and alien ichor. The creatures had tested every trap, every fallback, every human nerve. Yet still the survivors had held, Reeve, Mara, Lennox at the center of it all, driving every action, every order, every measure of hope. They paused briefly, arms braced against walls, faces blackened and torn, breathing in the tang of smoke and metal. Outside, through the flickering floodlights, the alien shapes regrouped beyond the inner wall. They were patient, intelligent, and relentless. And yet they had not broken through. Not yet. Reeve wiped soot from his eyes, looking over the survivors huddled in secondary positions. "One more push, and then we wait," he said. "We hold until daylight, and we survive." Lennox nodded, grim and silent. Survive, or die trying. Same difference. Mara checked the remaining charges and tripwires. "Everything's ready," she said. "Inner ring's solid. We've bought ourselves the night. Now we brace for what comes next." The creatures were out there, waiting, calculating. The survivors were in position, traps set, lines of fire prepared. The outpost held its breath, and for the first time in hours, the survivors allowed themselves a fraction of stillness. The furnace of midnight had burned through them, tested every nerve, and left them raw. Yet, against all odds, the inner ring stood, and still, dawn was coming. Chapter 15. Dawn and Relief. The pre-dawn sky was a dull smear of gray and violet, barely lighting the shattered world of the outpost. Smoke still curled from scorched corridors. Thermite puddles glimmered blackly, and the smell of burnt chitin, blood, and sweat hung thick over the compound. The survivors, 10 of them between engineers and soldiers including Reeve, Mara, and Lennox, moved like ghosts among the wreckage, dragging the wounded into the inner ring, checking barricades, readying what little ammunition remained. Every heartbeat was a drum of tension. Every shadow could conceal death. The creatures had learned, adapted, and now pressed with unrelenting intelligence. They probed, clawed, and forced the human line inward, compressing the survivors into the smallest possible defensive perimeter. Reeve crouched behind a twisted beam near the command platform, rifle slung but ready. His shoulder throbbed where a creature's claw had nicked him the night before. Mara was beside him, checking the final tripwire charges along the inner corridor, face streaked with soot and fatigue. Lennox knelt near a wounded corporal, tightening a tourniquet and loading his rifle in one fluid motion. "They've got us boxed," Lennox muttered. "Every corridor, every approach. They're pressing like a tide, and we're the last sandbar." "We make the sandbar count," Reeve said, scanning the dark ridges beyond the floodlights. "Inner rings solid. Tripwires, incendiaries, fallback positions. Everything's in place. We hold. That's all we do until the sun comes up." Mara's eyes flicked to the east ridge, where faint movement suggested the attackers were gathering for a coordinated assault. "They've learned patience. They're saving their strength for the kill," she said quietly. "Then we make the first kill count," Reeve replied. The first wave of the final assault came at the inner wall like a living hammer. 6-legged silhouettes leapt over rubble, claws scraping, armored plates glinting in the weak light. They moved with terrifying coordination, a tide of predators pressing on every corridor. The survivors opened fire, tracers streaking through smoke and dust. Grenades detonated in the hallways, fire licking around corners, shrapnel spraying the creatures, but they kept coming. Reeve fired from the command platform, picking out the heaviest forms, aiming for joints or gaps in their plates. One creature lunged through a doorway, talons snapping, and Lennox rolled beneath it, driving his rifle into its chest before finishing it with a short burst. Mara coordinated turret fire from above, sweeping corridors to catch anything moving through the smoke. The inner ring became a furnace. Every corridor was contested, every doorway a choke point. The survivors moved like cogs in a machine, exhausted but disciplined, buying precious seconds with every shot, every barricade, every trap. At one point, Reeve and Lennox were back-to-back in a corridor that smelled of scorched metal and blood. A hulking creature slammed into the wall beside them, the impact rattling the steel plates. Reeve fired, then rolled to the side as the creature lashed again. Lennox grabbed a fallen pipe, swung, and cracked the creature's leg joint, making it stumble into Reeve's line of fire. They didn't speak. There was no time. Only action. Only survival. The assault pressed on, hour after hour. Tripwires snagged attackers. Incendiaries turned narrow corridors into walls of fire. But the creatures adapted, learning and shifting with terrifying intelligence. They forced the survivors into the innermost section of the outpost, where every shot counted. Every missed round could mean death. Reeve caught Mara's eye across the command platform. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she said, voice steady. "We hold here or we die. There's no other option." Lennox nodded, checking his ammo one last time. "Then let's make it count." The creatures surged through the final corridor, pressing the survivors into a corner. Reeve and Mara opened fire, tracers cutting through smoke. Lennox threw a grenade into the midst of the attackers, the explosion rocking the corridor. They staggered back, but the creatures pressed on, relentless, adaptive, intelligent. Blood, sweat, smoke, fire, and fear filled the air. The survivors fought with everything they had, muscles burning, lungs raw, adrenaline carrying them past exhaustion. Every second was measured in breaths, every shot a prayer. Then, from orbit, the first tremor of salvation arrived. A distant rumble vibrated through the valley, not from the creatures, not from the ground, but from above. Reeve's head snapped up. "That's it!" he shouted. "Hold the line! Relief is on the way!" A flash of light appeared over the horizon, followed by a concussive wave that shook the outpost. Orbital bombardment rained down, streaking through the darkness in controlled pulses. The creatures howled in terror and confusion as explosions rocked the ridges, turning the terrain into a shattered, smoking landscape. The survivors pressed the advantage, firing into the disoriented creatures, pushing them back into traps, hallways, and incinerated zones. Every shot was precise, every movement desperate but calculated. The tide began to turn. "Drop ships!" Lennox shouted, pointing toward the sky. Gunmetal silhouettes descended, slinging ropes and deploying fire suppression systems to cover the landing zones. Marines poured from the craft, engaging remaining attackers, cutting through the chaos with disciplined precision. Reeve, Mara, and Lennox fought their way to the landing platform, dragging wounded survivors along, firing at anything that moved. The creatures, battered by bombardment and now facing disciplined reinforcements, faltered. One by one, the survivors made it aboard the dropships. Reeve took the last glance at the outpost as the craft lifted, smoke and fire rising behind them. The valley was a field of ruin, but the surviving humans, the battered, bloodied, exhausted few, were alive. Mara slumped against him, breathing hard but steady. Lennox grinned despite the grime and cuts on his face, shoulder leaning against the railing of the dropship. "We made it," he said, voice hoarse but triumphant. "For now," Reeve replied, eyes scanning the horizon. Relief had arrived. The night was over, but the scars, in the outpost, in the valley, in their bodies and minds, would remain. As the dropship ascended into the sky, the first rays of true dawn broke across the ridges. Orbital flares streaked faintly, bathing the valley in a harsh, brilliant light. Below, the creatures retreated, their coordinated assault broken by fire from above and the sudden arrival of human reinforcements. Reeve, Mara, and Lennox exchanged a glance. Exhausted, battered, but alive. They had survived 10 days of hell on Sol 10B-007, and the sun was rising on a world that had tested them to their limits and failed to break them. There is always a story to be told out here in the frontier, as long as there is someone to listen, like, and subscribe, and join us again for more.